We are now live for one of the last times this month, but we will be going over to Yardstream, or StreamYard. I think it's StreamYard, yes. So, over to Jonathan.
All right, so this was inspired by something that was said in one of the last hangouts we did. But it's all about how 5, 6, and 7, they're all head types, which means they all have different ways of thinking about things and analysing things and different motivations for learning. Basically, how should I put this? Since we're going by tri-type theory, everyone has 5, 6, or 7 in them. And therefore, everyone's analysing problems in a way consistent with 5, 6, or 7. And that can affect not necessarily what you learn, but why you're learning it and how you understand it. So, for example, there was this. What made me really understand it was this time I was trying to type a fictional character who was a villain. And I recognised it was a type 8, and I thought his tri-type was 854 at first. But when I looked at the tri-type, it didn't really fit him. So I tried looking at other combinations, and I got to 6. And when I realised 6 made a lot more sense, I also noticed that the way this character thought was actually much more consistent with 6 than 5. The way he was learning things was consistent with 6 rather than 5, because this character, he was very intelligent, but he clearly didn't trust his own judgment that much. He didn't have a great education, which isn't necessarily a thing, but he was also, whenever he had the problem, he always got stuck. And so he always sought out, or was forced to seek out someone else's help in order to solve it. And eventually he gets recruited into this cult, and he ends up reading all their texts, and he thinks, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. This is how I make sense of the world. The texts of this cult that he joined all align with his worldview and reinforce his worldview, and he devoted himself to it in the manner of a 6, even though the character is definitely an 8. To the point where he actually notices that the behaviour of the cult he has joined is not at all consistent with what the cult is teaching, and he ends up turning against the cult and killing them all just because he doesn't agree with what they're doing to it. He comes up with his own philosophy, but is based on the teachings that he has read. So that's an example of how the thinking type can affect things. So you'll see it in the core types, but you'll really see it when you start thinking about tri-types. So as I was saying, if someone's an 8 with 5, they will be thinking differently than an 8 with 6, and thinking differently again as an 8 with 7. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll just say about who's in the hangout here. We've got, going from left to right, we've got Book, Enneagram 5, Janae, Enneagram 6, Jonathan, Enneagram 1, 5-2, Justine, probably 4, Sana, sexual 4, Tamsi, sexual 4, and then myself, sexual 7, but Jonathan thinks social 5, and Catherine thinks social 6.
Yeah, you're very annoying.
I should say Jonathan thinks I'm social, so, right?
Sorry?
I said you think that I might be social as opposed to sexual, so we're exploring that. I am.
Yes, I'm. Yes, the point is, there's a lot of people in this hangout who are wrong about the tri-type or the type because I don't agree. Because I don't agree with it.
Exactly, because you're the critical one aspect coming out, right? Okay, that's cool.
Right. So yeah, has anyone ever noticed the differences when they're talking to someone who's a different head type than them?
Notices the differences in what I just joined.
Yeah, like if you have 5 in your tri-type, have you ever noticed the differences between how someone's thinking if they have 6 or 7 in there, or vice versa?
Yeah, definitely.
You're a little bit faint, Tamsy.
I said yes, definitely. I definitely
better.
know the difference. I mean, speaking to different types of personalities, just in general, the way we process. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but,
Yeah.
but specifically someone who has 6 in their tri-type or someone who has 7 in their tri-type, because the tri-type is, well, the head type is the way you're really analysing the world and the way you're really thinking about things, your motivation for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, aye. Like, for example, okay, if you're 5, then your goal is to be an expert. You want to own knowledge in some sense. So when you research something, it's to feel a certain ownership of knowledge. An example Catherine gave was someone who was a 5 and they were told something they didn't know and they went out and researched it and then they repeated that knowledge to someone else as if it was their own without really bothering to say they got it from someone else. And when they were confronted about it, they said, well, it wasn't really my idea then until I read about it myself, until I confirmed my own opinion. Whereas with a 6, the 6 wants to, in a sense, they're thinking more about who to trust. They don't trust their own judgment as much. The 6 is looking for sources of authority or allies, perhaps, to, in a sense, do the thinking for them in a way of overcompensating for their doubt and skepticism. And the 7's more about using knowledge as a form of distraction in a way, or what interests them. They're more of curiosity. The 7's not necessarily going to be. They're kind of in between the 5 and the 6 in a way. They're not as conforming or subordinate to authority as the 6, but they're not as obsessed with owning knowledge as the 5. There's kind of a. It's almost like it's fun for them. And that's for the counterphobic 6. The counterphobic 6 also subordinates to authority in a way. They're just in denial about it. The counterphobic 6 will be as a sort of person who listens to the authority and then thinks or does the opposite, or they're attracted to authorities that go against the authority they're rebelling against. So the classic example would be someone who's raised in a very conservative household, rebels against it and becomes very liberal or left-wing or whatever. Or someone who's raised in a Christian household and becomes a Satanist or that sort of thing. But there's still... No, I'm thinking of someone specific. Yeah, in those cases, they're still kind of dependent on whatever it is they're rebelling against, because their identity now becomes the opposite, the diametrical opposite of that, plus they're conforming to a new authority. Although the counterphobic 6 in particular will often really not like the idea that, or the suggestion that what they're doing is subordinating their thought to an authority, because they'll often see themselves as very rebellious.
Yeah, counterphobic 6 would be somebody that would say, like, I'm terrified of heights. Let me just face this by bungee jumping today. Right? Just putting them...
Somewhat, yeah. They may not even admit to fear all the time, but they'll definitely it'll be in their overcoming fear.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's just one example. It's a whole range of examples of counterphobic 6. And there's also people who are kind of in between, who are phobic in some senses and counterphobic in others.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, does anyone have any questions or thoughts?
So it's a little bit cheeky to bring in Hitler, but we did a hangout on looking at the sixness of Hitler, and did you notice any difference between his approach and maybe some of his people around him who may have been 5?
Well, yeah. Well, Hitler. In the case of Hitler, Hitler was very, very insecure about his intelligence because he was very intelligent, but he did really, really badly at school, which is probably because of his rough upbringing, like his being beaten by his father and all of his close relatives dying early and stuff. He was very miserable at school, and by his own admission, he acted out a lot and pulled pranks and kind of lost interest after a while. But he did read a lot, and he did have conversations with other intelligent people. The other thing with Hitler is he was mentored by a guy called Anton Drexler, who believed that what Germany needed was some kind of Übermensch, some kind of messiah, some kind of genius to bring it out of the post-war era into greatness. And he told Hitler, "You are that guy. I think you may be that genius." So Hitler is a bit unusual in the sense because most sixes do not see themselves or want to be presented as some kind of extraordinary genius, yet Hitler went out of his way to. But he was doing that because he was fulfilling a kind of role. It's like he was fulfilling the role that, it's not so much that it wasn't simply that he saw himself as a genius, although he may have, it's that he needed the German people to see him as a genius in order to properly fulfill his role and get his goals carried out.
Would that not also be like the loyalty of the six to the mentor?
Yeah, somewhat. The other thing with Hitler was he did often pass himself off as an original thinker, but as historians noted, none of his ideas were at all original. Everything he did was everything he thought. All of his ideas were plagiarized from somewhere else, and sometimes he would quote other authors ad verbatim. He had a great memory. He could quote other authors ad verbatim. And some days he'd be called out on it, and he'd dismiss it as saying, "Well, everyone does that. Everyone bases their ideas on someone else." So sometimes he'd be quoting. Sometimes he'd be saying something really deep and philosophical, and then someone noticed that's from Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, for instance. So that's Hitler with someone like, yeah.
I have something about this loyalty aspect because last night I rewatched Tick talking about Case Blue and this thing about Hitler where there was two things with he saw World War One as he called it the stab in the back, where he thought because the German people were not happy because there was suffering
it wasn't just him, it was a common myth.
Yeah. And so then Turk talked about this other book called Hitler's Beneficiaries, about just how this huge welfare state was created for the German people, and this idea of to avoid the stab in the back thing.
I wouldn't go.
Well, that's because we have the differences with differences in the opinion on just how socialist Germany was. But this is a huge sideline, and we'll get back on track. Yeah. Janae, are you available to talk about what you think? Are you there, Janae?
Maybe she went to the bathroom or something.
Right, okay. I got an idea. Sana, what do you think of fives? And then, because Sana and Tamsin, you could talk about fives, and then we could have Put come in and see if he agrees with it.
I'm trying to think of any core fives that I actually know. Kind of difficult because I don't seem to.
Well, do you know any INTJs or INTPs?
Yes, but not fives. Well, there's one ILI that's a 5. But I don't know if I see the 5 all that clearly.
Okay.
What about you, Jonathan?
Well,
what time is it? Oh, she did a little bit.
I know people who have 5 in the tri-type, and I know a 7, but it seems like most people I know tend to have 6.
so what do you think of people who have 5 or 7 in their tri-type? Or how do you see the differences between how you think and how they think?
Well, when it comes to 7, they have somehow this super positive outlook that I do not. They're always hopeful in some way. Always looking for a positive change.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the negative ones.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about 7s is when a 7's learning stuff, very often they will learn everything they can about it as long as it's fun or interesting, and they'll kind of slide over or skip over the darker stuff. They'll do the dark stuff to a point, but they won't focus on it quite as much. They'll focus on what interests them. One person I know of, not very well, but I know of, who I type as 172. So basically my tri type, but I'm a 152, they're a 172. This person is always very busy and they're always doing stuff. They've always got all these different projects and interests going on. They also do read a lot, but they've said that they like to read short books that are not very long. They don't like reading like trilogies or 1,000-page novels or anything like that because they get bored and disinterested. They'd rather read books that are like just a few hundred pages at most, and then move on to another one and another one. So that speaks to, there's a good example of how the 7 thinks and how they read. There's like more focus on breadth rather than depth. They read that. Yeah, they read that sort of thing.
I think they can also intensely focus for some time if it's really interesting to them. Like my father will totally focus whenever it's about flying. He can, it just needs to be a very interesting topic that they're really interested.
Yeah, really interesting topic. And there's also, it can be assessed no matter how interested they are in it, there's also not necessarily taking it quite as seriously as a 6 or a 5 might, whereby they're not, because they're doing it for fun, because they're doing it for how it interests them, rather than thinking so much about practical applications or seeing problems or anything like that. Although I think if you challenged the interest, like if you dismissed the interest or whatever, they would defend it and they would go out of their way to argue why it's important or why it matters.
I never tried to do that. I should try and see what happens.
Yeah. How the thought is going.
Could you repeat what you said about 5s not revealing the source of the knowledge?
It was more basically an example I heard was there once was a 5 who basically he learned something from someone else, then he went out and researched it and confirmed it for himself, then he repeated it to a third person, and eventually the person who told him or someone else said, why are you repeating that as if it's your own knowledge when you learned it from someone else? And he said, well, when I learned it from that guy, it wasn't mine. It wasn't my knowledge. I had to go out and read it and confirm it for myself to make it mine, to make it part of me.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that. It's important to do independent research, not just rely on others.
Yeah, I can relate to that a bit too, because I remember sometimes my mother would tell me something, and then I'd look it up or research it, and she'd be annoyed that I didn't believe her. Or Even if it was just something quite trivial, I always had to know. I always had to want to confirm it myself. Yeah, my mother, I'm pretty sure, is a self-res 6. So there's the issue of the trust.
And ISFJ, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So
my son's a 5, and he's an INTJ, one of them. And it's incredible the amount of knowledge he has that I've had zero knowing that he's been accumulating, like the things that he's been researching, even like world history, and he's into a lot of things that nobody knows until he comes out with this vast, very strong, solid opinion about. It's all of a sudden we're sitting in the family room and he'll interject, and it's like, where did you come up with all of this? And he's really heavily researched, and he's like that with the fact checking anything that I share. He's pretty quiet. He's not, rude about saying I don't believe you, but he'll come back, a week later with the complete lowdown as to everything that's going on in that subject and whether or not he thinks it's valid.
yeah.
So, it's really interesting to witness that. I have 5 in my tri type. So I understand the rabbit hole kind of for learning, but to operate that way first with that observing mentality, like not having to come into the room showing what you know, but coming into the room as a source of knowledge, but only sharing those pieces when it's really truly called for, is what I see with the 5s in my life. I have quite a few 5s and 7s actually in my life, so it's interesting. There's a huge difference for me sitting in a room with a 5 and a 7.
Well, what do the intelligent 7s? How do the intelligent 7s come across compared to the 5s?
But much lighter. Like there's just a much more playful type of energy. Whereas a 5, like you sense the seriousness. It's like almost like you can feel the energy in their head turning. Like it's a sharpness that kind of it's not. Sometimes it comes across as arrogant, but it's just like it's a sharpness and authority without having to put on any front from a 5. In terms of the knowledge that they're hosting and when they're about to share an opinion, versus a 7 will. I think typically what I find is like there's a playfulness and there's a curiousness as to how interested you might be in the subject that they're interested in at hand is more what I feel. And then an excitement to share what they have.
Yeah. I also say the 7 can kind of imitate an expert without being one as much. Like a 5 will often not call a 5 will often be very reluctant to call himself an expert on the subject.
Yeah.
Unless they've researched it for years at a time. Whereas a 7 is much quicker to do it. Like there's this one person, I won't name names. He thought he was a 5. I think he's a 7. He asked, probably an ENTP. I think he is an ENTP. He asked me about. He said he thought he was a 5, and he asked me about it, and I described what the 5 was, and I included that 5s want to be experts in something. A short time later, he was saying, "Okay, guys," he was telling people in a forum or a group, "Okay, guys, I'm a 5. I mastered the Enneagram, and I'm going to start talking about it on YouTube." He's going to start talking the Enneagram on YouTube because he's become an expert on it after a few weeks. And then shortly after that, he asked me about Type 6 because he didn't understand Type 6. Right. It also reminds me of if you think of the Marvel films with Tony Stark, Iron Man, he's definitely a 7. And there's a scene in one of the films where someone asks him, "When did you become an expert in nuclear physics?" And he just says, "Last night." So that's the kind of mentality a 7 can have. Like they can sometimes think they're experts on something after researching it for a relatively short length of time. Not just because they're faking it, not just because they're trying to impress you or anything, but also because since they're focusing more on breadth rather than depth, they might honestly believe that is as good as being a genius. that is as good as being an expert on it. Researching it for a shorter length of time than a long length of time.
Well,
They pick up very quickly.
I think it's the enthusiasm. I'm thinking about one person in particular in my life that's a 7, and he's also in, the holistic field. And there's naturally a tendency to like whatever subject I will bring up or whatever idea it is that I find, is something I'm going to work on. No matter what I say, there's always like a jump to a positive kind of direction for me. So it's like I say, I'm going to do this. And it's like he's problem solving before I've even had an opportunity to think whether or not it's like going to be able to be fully fleshed out. There's just this enthusiasm to always go for it. Like just paving the path, even if he's not highly versed in whatever it is that I'm saying. So, but he will get little bits of information and completely do that. I don't know if that's making sense.
It kind of makes sense, yeah. Another thing I thought of is a lot of salesmen who have 3 and 7 in the tri-type, and they'll often say that you don't really need to know what you're selling. You only need to know the bare bones of what you research. Selling is an art in itself, so all you need to do is give them a product, doesn't matter what it is, tell them about it in 5 or 10 minutes, and then they'll go out and sell it, and that'll be how they do their job, basically. And they'll make entire careers out of selling things that they know about on a very shallow level. But they're able to convince whoever they're talking to that they know all about it, and they've everything about it is great, whatever the product is. So like professional salesmen who don't really care what they're selling so much.
Yeah. Well, this person that I was reflecting on is a 739. That's the triple enthusiast, right?
Well, no, it's double assertive and double positive.
Double assertive, double positive. Okay, not sure where I got that. It was something I watched.
Well, yeah, Catherine said it is the most positive tri-type, but it's one of those. It's one of those. Technically, 279 is the most positive tri-type, but 379 comes across that way because the 2 is positive because they're trying to avoid negativity, whereas the 3 is positive because they don't want to focus on failure. Yeah.
Jonathan.
Yes.
We now have 2 5s in the hangout, Ruth and Hawk. I wonder if you could ask a question to Ruth first, and then Hawk could follow
up. Okay, how do you feel about the term expert?
I don't feel like I'm an expert.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you can never stop learning about something.
Yeah. Would you ever try and pass yourself off as an expert, even if it's something that you've studied really thoroughly?
No, I don't think so at all. I think there's always so many more things you don't know.
Well, would you ever try and pass yourself off as an expert if you were like in the company of, or if you had experience of people who were interested in the same things you were, and they were trying to pass themselves off as experts, even though they clearly weren't, even though you knew more about them, and maybe they were passing off like wrong information?
I think in like relative terms, like if you needed to get a degree in something to be called an expert, and that was the term that everyone was using, then I would use expert in that context. But otherwise, no, it's not a word I'd use.
Okay. And Hawk, is it? You're muted.
Oh,
What
yes.
was that?
Sorry, I don't think I would use that term either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because when I joined this channel, Ben tried to introduce me as the Enneagram expert, and I always said no, I'm not. I was always just learning, and even years down the line now, I always say it as kind of a joke.
Mm-hmm. Calling yourself an expert cuts yourself off, I think, in a way. It's like, this is the limit of what you can learn.
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of knowing other, reading the stuff of other Enneagram, of actual Enneagram experts and stuff relative to them. I can kind of get a sense of how much I know and how much I don't. And I think there's very specific areas of the Enneagram or of typology that I know more about than most Enneagram teachers. But that's because of certain things I've been taught, especially since most Enneagram teachers don't know cognitive functions or sociologics or stuff, and how that can be combined or not. Or if they do know, they don't know it as well as I do. I say, like, I'm not an expert in Enneagram, I'm not an expert in Myers-Briggs, but I'm like more of an expert than, kind of, I'm high up in both. I'm not up, you get it. I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It's just coming out as a yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we just need to make a new word.
There's the word buff or buffing.
I like that.
Or brainiac.
You're like a master at it.
Well, brainiac's a supervillain.
So Hawk, I think you said there that you wouldn't describe yourself as an expert. So how would you describe yourself?
I guess as a lifetime student, always trying to learn as much. I wouldn't know where to set the bar for where is expert level.
Yeah. I think fives will call themselves expert in relative terms, depending on the situation, or if they feel either that if they genuinely feel that they're amongst frauds or something, they might start to assert their intellectual authority, or if they start feeling insecure about their intelligence, they might start doing that as well, and they'll try and, because when fives are less healthy, they get insecure about their intelligence because that's how they defend themselves against the world, and so they'll start trying to find ways to make others look stupid, at least in their own eyes, in order to raise their own self-esteem. That's the less healthy five. So a less healthy five might start throwing words like expert around. A five will only call himself that either if they think it's factually true or if they're joking around, I would say. That's my opinion. So
I think that I'd agree with that, and also that fives are just knowing the fives in my life, not the ones with fives in their tritype, but fives have no problem also cutting into something that they feel is not worthy of the esteem that it is, and kind of like putting it in its place or putting the person in their place about factual stuff. So that's something else like that where I see that authority come in, even though the five might be more shy in the room in terms of not interjecting or being overbearing with their energy, they also can be the ones to be the first to kind of point out when somebody's just rambling off stuff that's not factual.
Because there's definitely a pride in knowing, a pride in like thoroughly researching a particular subject that's interested them, and they can kind of take offense at ignorance, especially if it's blatant or unearned ignorance.
So I was thinking we could, because we've got three exemplars. Well, 2 exemplars and 1 by proxy. In that Tamsin's son is 5, and maybe we could start with Hawk, where you could talk about the things that you're interested in, and then Ruth, and then Tamsin.
I don't know where to start on that.
Well, what's your job?
Oh, a bit of a freeze there. Okay, we'll have to move over to So Ruth, what are the things you're interested in?
In general,
Yeah.
I like Enneagram. Anything like science, nature, biology, physics, math.
Anything not typically NT?
Oh, art.
Ah, what kind of
I
art?
do like art. Photography. I burn with fire. Painting.
Ah.
I can get into pretty much like anything.
Well,
as long as it's not boring.
Hmm.
Something boring, I'll probably not be interested.
okay, what are you not interested in?
Um,
Boring things.
I'm not interested in.
Oh.
You know what? Like social things, like breakdancing or well, actually that might be interesting too. I don't know.
Sport.
Bungee jumping, not interested in that.
Well,
Accounting, that'd be a little too boring for me.
then I would just write your well, do you know what your instincts are?
For what system?
The
For
instinctual.
Enneagram?
Yeah.
I think self-preservation.
Really? You're not interested in accounting? Because self-pres fives are kind of.
Well, I took it in school, so I kind of all interested.
Roger.
Yeah, self-pres fives are sometimes they can be quite interested in accounting and numbers and stuff because they're hoping to use their knowledge to gain financial security. It somewhat depends on the tri-type, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what your tri-type is?
I suspect 594.
Okay.
You guys can talk that out.
Yeah, I think usually the self-pres fives that are really interested in money have 3 or 8 in there. Yeah. I can get one example of a character I think is a self-pres 5. I'm going to mute Sana. We can hear you keyboarding, Sana. She gave me a death glare. Yeah, one character I can think of who is a self-pres 5 is Robert De Niro's character in the film Casino. That's a true story. He's based off a real person, and in both cases, he grew up in a rough part of Chicago, I think, and he fell with a bad crowd that was did errands for the mob, and the mob were running a lot of underground gambling things. So this guy saw that, and he saw how much money was being made, and he decided he's going to learn absolutely everything about gambling, everything about sports, how weather patterns affect sports games, everything about the personalities of particular players, everything he could, to the point where he was able to be a fantastic gambler and all, and knew how to make money. And the mob eventually trusted him to run their casinos in Las Vegas. And he did all this despite not having a single interest in sports whatsoever. Sports themselves did not interest him. It was the making money that interested him, and the calculations, and getting accurate or winning. That was the sort of thing that interested him. That's an example of how a 5 thinks. He went out of his way to thoroughly research something because it interested him, but also because he's a self-pres 583 probably, or 538 perhaps. He was really focused on making money off of it. If you're a self-pres 594, maybe a bit more about routines and comfort and minimizing stuff rather than profit making. Well, how do you see yourself as a self-pres 5 specifically?
I'm not sure. I like being alone a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, all 5s will do that. This is more with self-pres 5. It's more like they're using knowledge to either gain profit or to minimize their needs, minimize their dependence on material stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're either very interested in making money or they're just trying to minimize their need on money. But there'll be a focus on
probably more of the latter.
Mhm.
More like a minimalist.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, how
Do you
do...
have any other questions?
Well, I'm running out of questions to ask for the 5s right now. I was wondering if we could talk about the 6s. Since they're... Yeah, so... Janae, for example, how do you see yourself as studying and researching things?
I think if you're a 6, you use both wings. So I can kind of relate a little bit to all 3 of those ways of thinking, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
Because I definitely look for theories and systems, but I don't just read them and then start quoting them and not think about it myself and kind of connect it to other things, and it needs to make sense to me. Because there's some things with Enneagram where they don't necessarily apply to you. I mean, just because you're you're a 6, not everything about 6 applies to you. So I think I kind of use a little bit of each of them because the 7 likes to research a bunch of different things, but I research those things in depth like a 5 would. So I can kind of relate a little bit to all of them. I think as a 6, you're a lot, as far as like seeing yourself as an expert, I don't know that I will ever see myself as an expert in anything. And I'm very hesitant to speak up and try to guide somebody else too much unless I feel like I really know what I'm talking about. So that might be the 6 kind of looking outside themselves for authority and not trusting their own a little bit. I don't know.
So,
I'm kind of trying to think about it because I haven't thought about it a whole lot.
okay. So I have a reveal to make. So somebody who's not been on camera since 2016 has been in this hangout pretending to be somebody else. Over to Jeff.
Do you like my accent? Was it all over the place enough for you?
I got to say, I thought he looks like Jeff.
Didn't I say if anybody's going to spot me, it's going to be Jonathan?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. The glasses fooled me.
All right.
But...
Yeah, well, I had to do something. But anyway, sorry about that. This was Ben's idea, by the way, because he thought not enough people would recognize me there. So I'm gonna leave and come back as myself. But hopefully everyone enjoyed the debut of Hawk Adams.
I've never met you. Hello. I did think that there was something curious about your energy. I was like, it's almost like he's hiding from us.
I was actually wondering, why did Ben let a guy in here rather than a woman?
Ooh. What did you say? Let a guy in here? What?
Ben doesn't normally invite guy guests. He usually invites women guests.
Oh yeah. All right, I'll be right back.
Okay. So yeah, a fake 5.
It was hard to try and work him in to the conversation. I thought I'd be cracking up. So.
This is why I think you're a 7. Like, everything's about what's fun. Ben even has to make it fun to reintroduce somebody back into the group. It has to be fun.
I'd do that though.
Technical things, right, to make sure it said Hawk rather than Jeff. So I created this account last night. And then I gave Jeff the email and the password so he could log into it.
I feel kind of bad that I never figured it out because I did think he did. I did think he did look like Jeff, but it never occurred to me that he was Jeff. I feel dumb now.
Good. I'll let him know to watch this bit when he comes back. So yeah. So like I said, he has lost a lot of weight.
Yes, he was very good. He does look like a different person.
Yeah.
I believed he was Hawk Adams. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Jeff who came up with the first name.
Yeah.
Oh,
So Janae, you were saying something before.
That's really weird because I knew who that was because I knew his voice. And I never even looked to see what his name was. I never saw him before because the only time I've been on a hangout with him, he just talked. He didn't have a picture up.
Yeah.
So I knew who that was. I didn't look to see what his name was.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm glad you kept it to yourself. So
I didn't say anything.
Change his shirt.
Hi, everybody.
I knew his voice.
Do you know, could you say that bit again about how you rumbled Jeff straight away?
Yeah, I knew who he was because of his voice.
Yeah.
Because he did a hangout with he came in on a hangout one time, but he didn't show his picture. And he just talked, so all I know is his voice. So I knew who that was. I just didn't look, so I didn't see he was called what Hawk.
Well, that's where I feel because I've seen him in videos before and I've been in hangouts with him before. So
yeah, I probably wouldn't have known.
I've got to work on my voices.
I thought it was just like, he probably comes from the same place as Jeff, but I guess not. I guess he does actually. He does come from the same place as Jeff.
And Jeff, the little details that Jeff goes to, even got the NT picture behind him of space.
Yeah, like I told Ben, the funny part is that this is actually the office of an ESTP, so it's not even a NT.
Yeah, well, you can't really see it anyway because your head's in the way. Yeah. Or
my head is showing some, but not.
Or rather, Hawk Adams' head was in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Jeff, since we've got you here, how do you approach like researching stuff or intellectual stuff, whatever?
It sounds terrible.
Wait a minute, Jeff. What about when you were really into encyclopedias as a kid?
Well, see, that's the thing is that wasn't research to me. That was just a thing to do. You know, it was like I'd be fascinated by certain things, and I would like reading about them, learning. You know, what he's talking about encyclopedias. Like I liked reading about presidents and different countries and stuff, kind of social studies type of stuff. But it was just like it was about the people, and it was about certain sort of, I don't know, random things I like. Like, you know, for each president of the U.S., it'll have like, you know, their term was this time, you know, and I didn't memorize any of them. So, you know, whatever the first one was, it like 17, you know, George Washington, like 1789 to 1793 or whatever, you know, whatever the year was. And that in itself, just like those little details of everything, you know, the countries, it was like their flag, their form of government, all those kind of stuff was just stuff that I thought was cool. So it was absolutely not anything about trying to gain any kind of amount of knowledge or become an expert on anything or anything like that. Now I have retained enough of like presidential trivia stuff that I've been able to stump people with some questions about those kind of things. But again, that's just the enjoyment of being able to play a game with somebody with that. It has nothing to do with any kind of, you know, wanting to make any kind of storehouse of knowledge or anything like that.
I think with Jeff, he's talked about this before, that when he gets into something, he really gets into it.
Yeah. I mean, I do have like sort of occasional side hobbies and stuff. I mean, it's not that I'd only do one thing, but it really was like if somebody was observing my life, they really would probably tend to say that, you know, I have one major obsession and anything else I do is sort of an offshoot of that. So
what is your actual type since you came in as?
Oh, sorry. I'm actually type 7. Yeah.
You're which score?
7.
Yeah, he's an ESF. He's an ESFP 7.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, for you, it's all you're researching things because they're fun and interesting, not because you're trying to.
Yeah, that's why I wouldn't even call it research. It's like because it's not, you know, research like implies that you're trying to gain, you're trying to learn about a particular thing in order to like accomplish a task or something.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I guess you could say I've done that, but it's sort of incidental, or it's very tactical. It's very, you know, in the moment of, this is what I need now. This is the information I need now. It's not at all like, future thinking about, I need to learn this amount of whatever, in order to get to some level of expertise or anything. And probably the thing I'm the most, if there's anything I would call myself an expert at, it's probably like late 1980s, early 1990s music chart trivia, and even that's limited to the U.S. So it's a really like kind of niche, but there are the people that are into that. And so, when somebody is just like talking about particular stuff from that era, then I can answer a lot of trivia when it comes to those sort of things. But even that, there's people that know more than me. So it's like there's nothing where I'm like, I'm like number one in knowledge of this subject. There's nothing like that.
Jeff, could you talk a bit about how your sort of approach to Doctor Who and how much you got into it? Because Janae is also interested in Doctor Who.
How I got into Doctor Who?
Yeah, and sort of like your approach.
First time or the second time?
Well, yeah, I suppose second time.
Because the first time it just happened to cross it as a kid on TV, on PBS, and as it turned out, it was right in the middle of the story called The Ark in Space. And so I was, my brothers and I, just happened to cross it, and we're all like kind of instantly hooked because it was good. Like, and, we used to watch like Monty Python and a few of the other PBS shows from Britain that they would show at night. So it was like a Saturday night, and we just came in the middle of it and like, what's this? And then it was only probably a couple years as a kid that I watched it before, either I lost interest or they stopped airing it for a while or something, some combination of that. And then as an adult, I heard about when they brought Doctor Who back in the UK. And I remember the first pictures that were posted online of like the new Doctor and Companion, and I was like, that looks dumb. I was like, that looks like a stupid version of Doctor Who. And I didn't really think about it again for like a year. And then because, anybody who's into Doctor Who now probably doesn't realize that now there's like this instant turnaround where that when they bring out new episodes that America gets it at the same time pretty much as the UK, but that wasn't the case when they first brought it back. It was like almost a year before they put it on American TV after it, debuted in the UK. So I hadn't really thought about it, and then all of a sudden they started running ads for the Doctor Who on the Sci-Fi Channel, and I was like, So I was like, well, I'll give it a try. I'll watch it once. I'll see, if it's any good. And that was the funny thing is, just by virtue of that coming back to American TV, it reignited my interest in the classic Doctor Who. And it was right around that time, probably intentionally, that they released on DVD the beginning box that had like the first 13 episodes or whatever it was from back in the 60s. So I was like, well, I saw the first few episodes a long time ago when I was a kid on PBS. So I said, well, I'll get that, and I'll introduce my son to it, who was like 6 years old at the time. So he's a little bit younger than I was when I first saw it. But I had sort of I'd been told that, the early episodes were not quite as scary as some of the ones that were on when I first saw it. So I thought, well, it'll probably be safe for my son. And it kind of was and it wasn't. The very beginning was, and then there was a few later on that were a little too scary for him. So he kind of took a hiatus from it for a while before he went back to it.
So is this your ESTP type A son that found it scary?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's my only son. But yeah, so that's that. Basically, like it was when they brought the show back for the new show, but I didn't really get into the new show. I got into the old show by virtue of being reminded of it. And I think I had seen some of the DVDs that were out before that in the store, and I remember that at that time it was like all these other shows like The Simpsons. I started collecting the DVDs. They came out complete seasons, and Doctor Who, I noticed it was like one story at a time, and they were like the same price or more than a complete season of The Simpsons. And I'm like, man, that's a ripoff. So I wasn't going to buy anything that was that expensive. And obviously by the time, I think it was 2006, I think, when I got the beginning box, and I decided, well, found a decent price on, Amazon or whatever it was. It was like a pre-release sale or something. So I'm like, well, even though it seems like too much for that many episodes, I'll give it a try, because, and I ended up watching in order all of the episodes, and then I started. Well, not all of them. I actually stopped before I got to the end, but my intention was to go through the whole thing, and I still think I will. I just don't know how long it's going to take me to do it. But I actually started reviewing them once I got like some distance into it, into the third Doctor episodes. So then I was like, well, I'll go back and review the ones from the beginning, and then I'll catch up to myself. And that hasn't happened yet, because by the time I started doing that, I got into other stuff, and Doctor Who was no longer my number one obsession. So to circle everything back, the stuff that I lose interest in, or it is no longer my number one thing, it easily gets pushed into the background and abandoned for years if it's not at the forefront of my which again, some types obviously are very different like that. They would like be obsessed with, I have to complete this before I do the next thing, or or they wouldn't be that way to begin with. They'd have like all the different aspects and not be obsessed with one thing. But I'm very much like, my focus is on usually one main thing, and everything else is just sort of side stuff.
I think how you got out of baseball was telling to me. I think, was it just like the atmosphere around the fans or something?
Yeah, well, what I've said, and I talked with my son about this, and we were because I've talked about the concept of like whether it's an SP thing or what, kind of the idea of sort of the obsession lasting a certain period of time and then sort of going through a shift where you change to something else as the number one activity. And most of my things like that have been around 3 years. Not exactly, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but it's usually around that time before when I start to lose interest and start to sort of get into something else. And with baseball, and to understand the extent of my baseball obsession, during that 3-year period, I was not just like watching baseball on TV or attending games or something like that. I got the video game MLB 10 The Show, and I was not only playing it every day, but I was like going in and adjusting stats and things to be as accurate as possible for like the current baseball season. So I was editing all this stuff, even though there was, nobody that was going to see this or care about it other than me. And when you're in this, even though it has like a franchise mode where you can do all this stuff, once you end the season and you start another season, all of that's erased. I mean, basically, like it keeps some things, but so it's not even something where there's like, I can take screenshots or I can put videos up, but it doesn't keep like a record of all these intricate little things that I went in and updated that were like, and changing like the looks of players down to like their eyebrows and other things, trying to get these things accurate or whatever. There was no payoff to that. It was just the thing that I was that much into that I was doing. And
but for you, like, what does that feel like in terms of some type of relief in your brain, that like things are compartmentalized, that they're accurate? Like, does it take off some type of weight internally, mentally, because there's always a payoff, right? There must be some internal payoff for you to spend that amount of time, or is it just a self system?
There really isn't. That's what I'm trying to say. There is no payoff. It's just while I'm doing it, it's the thing that I'm enjoying doing. And I can give another example. When I've always had, from one time I was a kid, I've always had at least a little bit of an interest in radio, and that's one of those things that's kind of come and gone over time. And sometimes it's been my obsession, sometimes it's not, but I've never completely abandoned it. Like, I've always said I'm a radio fan in some ways. And there was a period of time where the particular way that manifested was that I was making playlists of songs as if I was programming a radio station. So, and when I say playlist, I don't mean just like, top 10 songs of the week. I mean like every song, over like a week period, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and how often the song would be played, and, just the order of all that. Okay. Again, I I have been a volunteer at radio stations. I had one job that was writing for a radio station countdown, but I've never actually had a job programming a radio station. I've never been a music director. I've never had that as an occupation. I've never been anywhere close. And so there's no payoff to that. It was only, this is what I want to do now, I've got to do now, and I did it until I didn't want to anymore, and then I stopped.
Well, I think by payoff she meant like psychological payoff, like it felt good to you to do that.
Well, right. That's what I was saying, though, but I was contrasting because she was like, taking a weight off. It wasn't anything like that. It's only like, what is the current thing that I'm obsessed with doing, and put all myself in.
Sevens are in the now more often than other types too, right? Like being able to be like joyfully present in the moment. So I think like you're
he's an ESFP, so he's always like that anyway.
Yeah, I think there seems to be not a consensus on that, because it's another one of those things where it's kind of funny when you talk about different like Myers-Briggs types across the Enneagram type, because some of the stuff I've read about sevens talks about always like planning things or thinking about the next thing they're going to do, not the current thing. And so that, I think, probably maybe the ENFPs or ENTPs that are sevens, maybe they relate to that more. Maybe they're more like thinking about future ideas or whatever, because I'm not going to say I don't ever think about the future, but it's really, it's still very short term. And so what I've, the reason why Ben thought that people wouldn't recognize me from when I used to be on camera is because I've lost over 80 pounds in the last couple of years. And, so obviously that was my obsession for a while, was everything I was doing with diet and nutrition and trying to, and that has been, my thing sometimes before. So you could tell by looking at me, those periods where I was focusing on that and those that I wasn't, probably because I would lose and gain weight based on those things. But the reason I brought that up is that this process that I've done now, the most successful that I've been at reshaping my body and improving and all that, has sort of forced me to be more of a planner than I ever have been before, just in terms of the things I'm trying to do with my body. And it's still not anything compared to the real planners in terms of, it's still very short term. And even the thing, it's like, I can illustrate kind of both sides of it with one thing, because my plan, because I do sort of have one, currently I'm doing a very hardcore diet called the pure protein diet, but I'm only doing that for one more week. And then I'm taking a week break where it's my week of my birthday. I'm going to San Antonio. I'm just going to be like, I'm going to eat what I feel like eating on a day-to-day basis. And then after that, I'm planning on trying something that's called alternate day fasting, where basically you alternate between eating a very small amount of calories, some people 0 calories, and then every other day you eat basically normally what you feel like eating. And so I've got that plan of these basic ideas of what I'm doing now, what I'm planning to do that week, and then after that. But even the things I'm planning, it's like setting myself up to be as spontaneous as possible. So it's like, a creation. I've always said, if my ideal is still the same, which is that I would wake up whenever I felt like waking up and do whatever I felt like every single day. Yeah. Just wake up, okay, what do I feel like doing? And then just do it. That would be my ideal. Because of reality, society, I can't do that. I have a full-time job. I have, other responsibilities that prevent me from living that way. And I have learned just by circumstances to plan more things and think more about future stuff I need to get prepared so that I have a better life within the context of the society I live in. But if you ask me what's my ideal and could I snap my fingers and create a situation where I could just wake up and do what I felt like every day, yeah, I would do it in an instant. Still.
Yeah. I like that planning to be spontaneous thing. That's a great example.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's bits. So this profile, this is the 7. There are bits in here which sound very any dom. you've got bits like mentally linking things together, mentally connecting things, fantasy over reality, I suppose not down to earth, identification with plans and ideas, imaginal futuristic orientation. Because obviously when people write in these profiles, some of the people might not know, or they're looking for, and it's like, well, that sounds like the NE DOMs, that sounds like the SE DOMs.
Yeah.
I think like something like that, rational defense mechanism, rationalization.
Yeah. I'd say that SE DOM 7 still have the future orientations. Their future is more short term. They are still looking for the next fun thing to do. It's just like not in the
tactical, I suppose.
Yeah, not in quite the elaborate way that an ENTP7 or ENFP7 would. It's more straightforward.
So a game plan, not a career plan. Tamsin?
I was just going to say the general tone that I get from the 7s in my life is, even if they're doing really serious things or have like a vast amount of knowledge or are planners, the tone is so light and so airy that something to me that would be such a burden, and feel like so serious. I'm working so hard on, knowing this or learning this or, bringing this all together. And it's so intense. I find the 7s in my life are like, oh yeah, whatever. I just did this, and that, and I studied this over here, and I'm just lounging, doing what I like, and it feels like there's just such a joy to be with the 7s in my life, even if they're approaching, a lot of the same subject matters and the things that I am, even if they have as much planning as I have. I always feel like the energy that I get from them is that it wasn't a lot of effort. It wasn't the effort of what the word planning means. So it's like it might be still the same type of functions, but it's just there isn't that weight to it. The seriousness is really cut. So I just, as I'm listening to you talking, just saying like this is the amount of planning, but there's all this fun involved in it. It's just, I don't know, that air of playfulness just seems to, coming from like a 4 perspective where, things are more intense. There's just this lightness about all of the different things that you're doing. So even hearing you talk about just incorporating planning, I think a lot of the 7s that I know have planning, but it doesn't feel as serious. What does that say, Ben?
It says fancies, whimsy, fanciful, like these notions. Perhaps that's the kind of planning, like a fanciful notion.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know. There's, I guess fanciful. It's a lot lighter. And I think that the things that you're doing, to me, having to plan all of those things would feel a lot more serious than the way like you take your approach to it. Like, I'm doing this and this leaves me the most room to be spontaneous, even though I'm incorporating planning. Like, it's just it's playful.
Yeah, the planning is an adaptation. I mean, that's all it is. It's not a, it's, that's, I know less about Enneagram as I do about, Myers-Briggs and Kersey types and stuff. So I always think of those before I think of Enneagram. So I just think, I encounter more SJ types in the world, and they're confused by the way I operate, because if I told, the same things about here's what I've done over the last couple of years and, the diet, stuff like that, they approach it as, oh, you've changed yourself, by using these methods. So therefore, like you're a better person by these things that you've done to change into the person you are now that does this planning of things like meals and stuff like that. Whereas I look at it as I've adapted because it was necessary to get things better, but it's not I've changed into something that I'm now this that does that. I would rather still not do that. I'd rather to not, have to worry about that.
Right, but you're going to be optimistic about it.
Yeah, it's again like, SJs in general, like no matter what, no matter how smart and experienced they are, still kind of hold out hope that everybody will eventually become an SJ. I think they really think that everybody just needs to be trained properly or learn enough or mature enough to become that, and usually have trouble understanding that that's not what the rest of us are trying to do. But and that's not me trying to disparage SJs, by the way. I love SJs and value their contributions to the world, but and to my life specifically. But that's just kind of how I see it. Is I can see now those contrasts where I say, I know even now, as I tell people about this, mostly my coworkers, because those are the people I see every day, besides my son, that they're looking at it as that I've changed this aspect of myself, the planning aspect, not just changing my body, but that now I'm this guy who takes these things about my diet and health seriously. And the reality is, the seriousness of it really hasn't changed. It's just because again, 2008, I won a weight loss contest at my work, gained the weight back. 2010, I did a thing, it's called the Men's Health Personal Trainer Program, lost like 30 pounds, and gained it back. So obviously it's not like I had changed, I became serious about it in 08, and then that was how I was after that. It was just that the period stopped, and it just, the only reason, this time has been more successful, I mean, there's different reasons for that I won't get into, but I'll just say that I'm not going to regain as much weight as I did those previous times because the method is different. But my personality didn't change. The way that I approach the things didn't change. I'd still always rather do the spontaneous things, the easy things, the whatever I felt like that day thing. It's not a thing where I'm like, oh, I'm so happy that I learned how to, do this with macronutrients or whatever. Like that's all sort of necessary evils, I guess you could say, to achieve certain things.
Jeff, I take all that on board, but you also talked about maturity. So how do you think maturity has affected you?
Well, I think how has maturity affected me? That's a tough question. I think maybe maturity just makes it so that I'm less likely to do things that will hurt other people and myself, because I'm like, well, that's the fun thing to do now, so I'd screw them, including me, and just do it. Maturity is more like, I'm like, well, I do take certain responsibilities or certain relationships more seriously, in that I'm not like, well, I do want to keep my job. No, they might still be for somewhat selfish reasons, that I'm like, I'm probably never going to get, a job that pays me so much for doing so little. And so if I did something to lose my job tomorrow, it would suck, at least for a while. Eventually it wouldn't. I would figure something out. But, there's a certain comfort level that I appreciate in terms of allowing me to live a life I enjoy living. So it's like, yeah, there would be a certain excitement to me just kind of shooting out there and figuring something new out. And so I do think about that. I do have that instinct, not quite on a daily basis. Maybe when I was at a job that sucked much more, I had more of that feeling. It was kind of like every day I'm like, okay, I've got to get away and do something else. Now it's just sort of like, I'll have those whims, like, it'd be fun to just leave tomorrow and go to Disney World or something. But then I'm like, well, that the hassle is going to outweigh the positives.
That's another thing with you, Jeff. You love Disney World.
Well, yeah, Disney World's great.
I love Disney World too. It's not like ESFPs don't have monopoly in Disney.
Yeah, but he went there about 5 times though.
I lives in America.
I didn't claim that I did, or that we did. I did want to say though, because when last time when Jonathan was talking about the tri-type thing, I was still being my wonderfully convincing character that I did earlier. So I didn't respond to that, but I wanted to say too sensual. That I have 4 in my tri-type too, so I do have a little bit of relation there in terms of, and I am like really a really sensitive person. I'm easily hurt, and I'm not trying to stereotype and say that's a 4 thing exactly, but I'm just saying that. I'm just throwing it out there because it popped in my head.
Okay.
There we go. Starring cameo by Jeff. What's interesting there is there were little bits in there where Jeff gets into a process, and that's this thing that you get in socionics where ESFP is supposed to be a process type, and I'm like, really? They like to adapt and all that kind of stuff, but there are all these little things where I can see, yeah, Jeff's following a process there. Tends to be his own process, but is following a process.
I mean, doesn't everybody to an extent? Like, what's
you know what I mean?
What's the other side of that?
Well, I would just think that when I would look at the, I suppose it might be me looking at things in a shallow way, where you'd read about artisans. Oh, artisans like to adapt and do things their own way, and it's the SJs who are more about process. But
you say process is a contrast to adapting?
Yeah, that's what I initially thought. Or is it your own process?
You mean that to be like a scheduled thing, or just a predictable kind of process?
Well, just I sort of see it as, because you wrote about SJs like in a standard operating procedure. I suppose if it's somebody else's process.
Also said that SPs will get an MO. Where they get it, that whatever it is that they get into, they get into a repetition of it.
Ah, I didn't know that. Well, you've read far more than me. Enlighten us.
Well, it's one of those books behind you.
Oh, I've got to read more. That seems like a contradiction, that they like get into something to do it the same way versus like where you talked about like the number one thing is freedom.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that's why you can, if you follow any kind of professional sports, athletes to get to that level have obviously got to do a ton of repetition of the same thing. Over and over again, they're practicing the same skills to get that level. But, how many times do you hear a story about whatever athlete demanding a trade, or, they're unhappy with their team or their contract or whatever. So they're always sort of yearning for change or something new, but within that context. Mm-hmm. So it's like the context is I'm getting paid to be a guy who does this thing over and over and over again. So I'm still going to keep doing that, even though that in itself is not fresh. But maybe I go to a new team, a new city, I change my batting stance, I do, I change, other aspects. I change my hair. I do all these other, how often do you see athletes where there's all these stories about their behavior or their kind of making waves in some way, where it's not, oh, I'm suddenly going to change this entire thing. And sometimes they even do that. I mean, Michael Jordan was a basketball player, retired to play baseball, and then came back to basketball. You see those, those kind of things do happen. Some of them done at the same time, like Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, people like that were trying to do baseball and football at the same time.
I used to watch, frequently what they would say in sport is if someone's been retired, say 5 to 10 years, and they want to come back, they have this phrase, they've been too long out the game. The game changes, even from season to season. And in American sports, especially with how much people are scouted, so they do have to change up and adapt and evolve, don't they?
Yeah. And then, you see the players that retire and then they try to make comebacks. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But more often it doesn't because, and where I think that comes from, with SPs anyway, is that like they'll watch the sport and be like, I can still do that. I still feel like I want to do that, and the situation, it's sort of like, I'll start fresh in this other way, but I'm still doing the same thing.
And it's almost like they get to a point where mentally they're better than they were 5 to 10 years ago, but it's just that the skills have dropped off. And they almost think, well, if I had this mind 10 years ago,
Yeah, and what you said about the game changing, and the last time Michael Jordan came back, and when he was co-owner of the Washington Wizards, and then he made himself a player again. When he retired again, it was because he realized that no one else on the team cared as much about winning as he did, and he couldn't physically carry the team anymore. So it was like he was so like mentally he couldn't accept that he would look around and the younger players would have too casual an attitude. They weren't obsessed with we have to win. And
Wow.
in the old days, if he had teammates that were like that, he could just will them to win anyway, because he was that good that he was like, if I've got lollygaggers or whatever you wanted to call them on the team, people that are here for the paycheck and don't really care about winning, I'm going to do it anyway, regardless of them. And at that point, his body just couldn't keep, he couldn't do it. So he quit again because it was like, I can't stand coming to work, coming to practice, coming to games and seeing these kids around me who don't care enough. And when I'm like, I'm going to do it and win anyway, he can't do it anymore. So that was the end.
I noticed that with Jeff's eyes when he's talking, sometimes his eyes dart from left to right, 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 and I think Catherine mentioned that as a kind of 7-ish thing, just their eyes don't always focus on something too much; they're always searching for something new and interesting. That's
okay. That's
I
fine.
think they spoofed that once.
That's all the body language.
I was scared for a second you were going to say that it made me a Naiji or whatever. If anybody remembers that crap.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember learning all the bits. Jeff, I think you said they once diagnosed you and said all your eyes move over there. And it says, no, I was just looking at my son in the corner or something.
Yeah, that was a hilarious thing because they said the number one reason why they had typed me this way was that it was the direction that my eyes moved. And it was based on videos that I had recorded at home, sitting on my couch, where my couch is up against the wall. And so everything that happened in my room while I was doing these videos was literally on the left side of me. So every time I would look at anything in the room, I would look to the left. Mm-hmm. And they were saying that looking to the left was an indication of, whatever their version of introverted intuition was. So they said I was I was dominant of that because I kept looking to the left whenever I was thinking of things. They said it was when I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was just looking at something.
Yeah, I did that in the classes with Catherine where I kept looking up to the right-hand side, and it's because the pictures were just on Zoom up in the right-hand corner. So I kept doing that.
Sometimes things are a little simpler than people make them out to be.
Exactly.
They really are just physical things, but I don't mind, doing something that's supposedly a 7 thing. I'm fine with, even though I don't, like I said, I don't really see the Enneagram stuff doesn't jump out at me, the way the other, systems do. But I do see examples of it. I think it's with fictional characters, especially. I don't see it in real life, but I'll be watching. I watch. My current obsession is watching, old TV shows, and really not just TV shows, but consuming whatever I can from a period of time in the past. That's the easiest, simplest way I can describe it without getting way into it. But anyway, in the course of doing that, one of the things I watch is old soap operas, and if nothing else, soap operas are good for characterization if they're at all written decently, because there's so much dialogue. So much of the scenes in soap operas is just people having one-on-one conversations back and forth, rehashing a lot of the same things over and over and over again. And so you see people's types come out. And so, first thing I usually notice is Myers-Briggs type, but I also will notice certain Enneagram aspects. For instance, watching All My Children, the character of Adam Chandler that was on there for many, many years, I think is a type 3, but I think he's an ESTP type 3. So it's funny because there are other ESTP characters on the show that he contrasts with, because they're not necessarily after exactly the same things. He's like always trying to get money and power and achieve things.
Well, Michael Jordan would be a good example of a type 3, maybe ESTP, or
Yeah.
maybe an ISTP with 9 3.
Yeah, I think Jordan's an ISTP.
Well, he's probably a 9 with 3 then, because he's a very strong 3. Because that stuff you were talking about needing to win and be successful and all that, that's all very, very 3.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Jeff, I think you did the story about Michael Jordan where he wanted to do something perfect, but for him. Like in maybe the execution of a shot or something.
Yeah.
That it wasn't about the team, maybe it was about his own performance.
Well, I mean, I know he always was self-critical in terms of, his own performance. Like he didn't hype himself. That's the thing, and I think he was misunderstood by a lot of people. Like I remember when he made his Hall of Fame speech, that a lot of people took it wrong, and to me, it was really obvious what he was doing. And maybe because I had more understanding of type, that's why it came so obvious to me. But I think I probably would have even if I didn't have that, just because it was so relatable. Just me as an SP as well. But
Jeff, I think that you've talked about this before, but I think it's very indicative of a little bit indicative of your characters. When you said that you would go on maybe the Kersey forum, and you would give answers that were true, but were only partly true and were slanted in a certain way, so that people might think that you were a certain type.
No, I did that on. There was a Ventrilo chat thing that I did that with, because even though it was a voice chat, they had a lot of people who just came in and chatted in text, and so when I was bored, I would come into the chat like under a name where nobody knew who I was. It's a little easier to do in text than it is something like this, as I've demonstrated today. But yeah, I would, just make up great names like Creepy Stalker and Very Polite Cow and things like that. And then the thing is, when you've got a group of people that are revolving around a forum based on type, they're always like got this, there's this new person, we want to figure out the type, and so they would ask questions to try to figure out type. And that's the thing is, I answered questions honestly. I was not playing a character in the sense that I was making something up that wasn't true. I was telling the truth, but I was being very selective in how I responded to things, to sort of demonstrate, to sort of experiment, with how people will respond to certain words or certain ways you say so. So it was like I would answer everything very literally the way I normally do, but it was still kind of pointed, in a certain direction. And because I was curious as to if you stress sort of certain things when you respond, even if you're completely honest and you don't say things that aren't true about yourself, can you sort of convince people you're a different type than you are by simply sort of stressing certain aspects? And obviously the answer is yes, but it was fun to kind of demonstrate that in that kind of context.
So Jeff, what would you stress in order to make people think you were maybe NF?
Well, I mean, for me, when I read Please Understand Me Too and the chapter about the idealist child, I mean, a ton of that applies to me. There's a whole lot. And I think it's because that there's a lot of that stuff that's about just sort of being a sensitive child and being really easily hurt and attuned, in a sense, attuned to the feelings of others in some ways, that people sort of categorize those things as being NF things, when a lot of it is more F than it is N. So it doesn't require a strong intuition to just be somebody who feels things deeply. So since I was always a very strong feeling type, that wasn't hard for me to do. So that would be, an example, I guess, if I was going to stress something, it would just be those aspects, that sort of come naturally if I'm talking to a lot of NFs, because it's just sort of, those are the things that will come up. I remember once I was in a Google Hangout like this it was me and 6 or 7 INFPs. Everybody else was an INFP in the group besides me. And probably 80-85% of the time when we were talking about, I had no problem understanding, what everybody else was talking about and relating to quite a bit of it. And then it was the other 15, 20%. I was like diametrically opposed to it, if I understood it. Like some things I just flat out didn't understand, but other things it would be like some of the things. Basically, anytime they would do those things, like I'm not sure if I call it an NF thing, but it seems to be more than others that they like to do things where like personifying things that aren't person, like a country, saying like this country is, this type, things like that. I don't like that because then to me it sounds like you're saying like everybody in that country is all the same. I don't like the group, the classification, the kind of collectivist mentality of all of this group is a monolith that all thinks the same way or feels the same way. I'm so much an individualist that offends me, and I know that's the kind of area where I probably. She was talking earlier about like taking things more seriously. The times I sound like I'm like probably overly serious to some people who would be like, this is not a big deal, is something like that, where they're like, well, we're just having, fun saying, Spain is ESFJ or whatever the thing is, but I'll be like, it bothers me, like physically bothers me that somebody says something like that, because I'm like, no, that's millions of people that all have their own individual thoughts and feelings about things, and don't just put a blanket over them of one way of thinking. I don't even like in America, they refer to like blue states and red states. I don't like that either. I understand why those terms came into play, but I'm like, that's for an election. That's an election night thing to have a map turn colors to illustrate that. That's not this entire state is all this group that thinks the same way. I really don't like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like as if all people in Texas are Republicans when it's like probably like 55%.
Yeah, well, I mean, even that, it's like it's 55% or whatever on election day. It doesn't mean on a day-to-day basis that everybody all because when you're in a situation like ours that sucks, where you have two major parties that both have to basically not have any real principles in order to appeal to enough people to win an election. When you do that, you have a lot of people that are voting one side or the other because they look at it as the lesser of two evils. They're like, well, I don't really like this, but I feel like the least amount of garbage will happen if I vote for this party. So that's what they do. And so to then take that and classify that as, oh, all of those people are this group because of that. They're all blue or they're all red because of it. I mean, that's ridiculous. But yet, so many people do it on a daily basis. I mean, when I want my car fixed and I take it to a mechanic, I don't care whether the mechanic is a Democrat or Republican or who he voted. I just wanted to fix my car. Like it has no effect on me whatsoever.
I think people, they generalize things that they're less aware of. It's like, say, people might have a generality about the United States, or people like that, or English people are like this. It's when they know it, then they realize all the differences.
Yeah, and I just think when I hear those kind of things, why I brought it up in the first place is just because I was contrasting that aspect of INFPs, because I think more, again, I say I don't even know to what extent it's an NF thing, but at least more than it is an SP thing, I think. To see people as groups and say that everybody in this group is the same in a way.
I think what it is it's FI with NE, because NE likes to see connections and commonalities, and so it's like they'll concentrate on the commonalities and not the individualities, because they want the connections. So it's like all these people are like this, so they concentrate on what they have in common rather than concentrating on what they are different than. It's like they always want to make these connections and judgments and get to the essence of something.
And I'm definitely not trying to pull this chat away from, its original intention. I'm just saying things that come to me. Right. So if anybody wants me to shut up or start talking
well, hold on a second. I just feel that this might be relevant coming from like a little bit of a different angle, but you saying your typology in Myers-Briggs and just not necessarily being, okay, so you identify with NF in terms of like being a sensitive child. I just wanted to say this, and this may have zero bearing on your background at all, but what I do in my life, it's like I have this intuitive awareness and I have this spatial sense that comes through me or floats through me that gives me an idea of, a person and what a person may have gone through or what's going on in their mind or these types of things. So reading from that like NF perspective. But what I also understand from like a psychological perspective is that a lot of people that identify with being empathic or highly sensitive or intuitive also were sometimes predisposed to things that led to hypervigilance. So like a lot of NF character traits are associated with, like going from a psychological perspective, hypervigilance and being exposed to certain types of patterns that left the psyche open to not necessarily feeling as safe or comfortable as one could have been. And so having that extra sensory perception around you, being able to see the motives of everything that's going around, let's say in your home environment, not saying this is you, but as a young child, if you were made to feel unsafe in any way, then you might have been on guard constantly. So you develop these senses that are so closely linked that, there's a lot of science now. I shouldn't say science, but there's a lot of literature that you can read that correlates empathy and intuition being heightened because of hypervigilance or being exposed to certain types of things. So I think it's interesting because one of my sons, who we believe might be an ENTJ, was very, very sensitive as a child. And now, he's an 8 and he has more of that attitude of like, I don't want to be weak. I want to be macho. I'm not so hypersensitive now that like he's getting a little bit older, but he was always very intuitive and very hyper aware. And I think like as he gets older and is a little more vulnerable with his emotions, will also identify with a lot of these like empathy NF traits that you were talking about, like being able to fit in even though you're not in this. What did you say?
It's like you and your intuition, you picked up something like Jeff and like in his childhood with that. We once did a hangout called Tyrannical INTJ Spy Dad. A little bit of exaggeration.
Is that like I know, okay, so now I know your 4 is in your tri-type, and it's really evident even when we talk about 7, how you don't want to be like pigeonholed or like put, because that's like the 4. I don't want to be like stuck or contained in this one particular thing. But then also being so concrete in your typing, and then also feeling so fluid and comfortable with all the NF stuff. For me, I automatically go, whoa, okay, his childhood, what's going on over there? Because a lot of these things might have been developed, even though they're not your core personality traits, they would have had to be developed. You would have had no choice, because the mechanism of defense, of self-defense is survival. And so like we hyper hone in on certain things. It's like me, I'm an FJ, but my father is an ENTJ. So I have like these extra character traits that I was molded into for many years, thinking I was much different than I was, even though I felt really contorted and everything I was doing, even though I was excelling in a lot of these other types of positions that were really contrary to what my soul wanted. I really can fit in quite easily. I can adapt my language. I can change my mode of thinking, all of these things. But it was because I was in an environment that coaxed that. So I just watching all of your facial expressions right now, and that's overbearing what I want to say. I want to throw out there, I have huge, like, I'm really good when people come to me. I can talk to thousands of people, that's fine. Coming into situations like this where there's multiple energies and multiple people, it's a really overwhelming. I feel like I'm changing like 5 shades as I'm trying to talk and like think about the energy of each of the people that are on here watching. Think about like what's the 5 thinking, what's the 1 thinking, and the 7, and the 6 disappeared again. And
I'll give you. I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking, looking at your background there, I was like, man, I'd like to be there. That looks awesome.
So I just moved here. I totally radically did a spontaneous 7-ish thing that was probably like in my soul for a long time, wanting to come out west. And shit has hit the fan. I'm sorry for swearing. I'm
That's
not
okay
on this channel. because my sons hate me right now because I've taken them. So we have like mental health disaster from like the second half of the day on, or like nighttime on, but then during the day I'm able to have the ocean and I'm able to write, which has been like my dream, to just have an atmosphere where I can write and I'm not in 10 months of snow all the time. And it's like I feel like I'm actually allowed to be myself and have the types of things that make me feel wholesome and just revitalized in ways that I never could have even imagined, just by protecting my environment, like inviting an environment that is actually conducive to me. On the flip side, I might have to move back because I'm not sure this is going to work for my children. It's really, really taxing that way. But yes, I'll take you guys outside.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I love the ocean. But I mean, I understand part of that because one of the reasons that I didn't move at all was that my son was growing up here, and I didn't want to uproot him and kind of mess with his life. Not even just mess with his life in the sense of taking him to a different location, but just in the stability of me having a job where I knew I gonna have a paycheck where I could afford to just take care of his basic needs, and sometimes opportunities for him to do things that were fun and stuff like that. Whereas if I just said, I feel like moving to the ocean, then I would have adapted to it and figured out what to do, but I felt like it's not fair to put him in that position. So I guess that goes back to what Ben was saying earlier about maturity, is that the biggest thing in maturity in my whole life was when I became a father. Then I became a single father, and then I became a single father whose mother told him, I can't give you any more money. Those three things in my life were probably those points at which I was forced to mature whether I wanted to or not.
I'm playing the single mom card for a really long time, and I stayed in a city for 14 years that I didn't want to move into. So this was kind of my selfish expression endeavor, wondering in all reality, is it more mature for me to stay in something that is complacent and not happy and not conducive to me being able to operate optimally to extend to my kids? Or is it more mature for me to take the more challenging path right now, upset emotions, learn how to rebalance everything, and actually show my children that I went for my dreams and that we can do anything, even if it's totally crazy and you're a single mom and you're uprooting us, 4,000 kilometers away, but you're doing the thing that you said you always wanted to do. So it's a toss-up. I think there's like multiple truths in every scenario. And for my particular children, what I might be learning is for an ENTJ and an INTJ, the INFJ mom approach might not be the best one. I'm not sure yet. I haven't given it enough time. It's only been 6 weeks, 7 weeks. So
my mom is also INFJ, so I have some experience with that.
Oh
Jeff,
no.
Jeff,
the way that he says that I have experience with that. My children will say, this is what they said to me.
Well, I'm not an NTJ, so I don't have that experience with it. In fact, I had, two parents, INTJ father and an INFJ mother, and then an older brother who's INTP. And then I'm ESFP and my younger brother is ISTP. So in a sense, it was like there were sort of these factions depending on what was going on, because my younger brother and I are like the most alike in a lot of ways. But then I was the only F among the kids. So I related to my mom, I think, on a certain level there, but not quite in the way she thought I did. So she sort of projected more of herself onto me than was really there, I think, because she wanted to believe I was kind of like her ally in the family because I was the sensitive one like her. So
my kids what I'm learning, especially over the past 2 years, is they're so completely different than I am. Like so very different, so much so that, a lot of this spiritual aspects and things like that have been prominent in our household and in our life, but mixed with, because I have 5 in my tri-type, like an intense devouring of books and knowledge and things. So they see me really geek out on a lot of subjects, and then at the same time I look very whimsical and airy. But they'll call me on everything now, you know, like certain things like vaccines, for example. And this isn't to cause like a debate whether people believe or they don't believe, but there's a big thing, you know, with politics, with vaccines, with a lot of these big subjects that people go one way or the other. My sons are very open now about how very different their viewpoints are than mine on a lot of subjects, like a huge slew of them across the board. But now what they're finding is, because of my like authentic approach to like homeschooling and alternative everything, they'll come to me and say, well, Mom, we think you made a mistake with this, and that, and that's kind of crazy, and you shouldn't have done that. But because you didn't, you gave us all this room to figure this out for ourselves, and now we're free thinkers. So like we can actually think for ourselves. And I'm just like, it's really interesting the way that they've taken it in a positive light for them, even though a lot of my stuff could be too much for them, like too NF.
Yeah, you reminded me of something that when my son was pretty young, you know, like somewhere in the 3 to 4 range, I had a conversation with my older brother, the INTP brother, who said something, you know, sort of grousing about the fact that when I put my son to bed every night, I would tell him that God loves him. And he was telling me that I was like indoctrinating him with, you know, these religious views, and that, you know, he would raise my son without that, you know, if he was the one, if it was his son. And I told him at the time, you know, you can tell kids whatever you want at that age. They still are going to grow into themselves and come to whatever beliefs that they have. And when my son was like 13 or so, we were in the car going somewhere, and he described himself. I don't remember. He didn't say it like in an emphatic way, but he basically said something like, "I'm basically an atheist," or something like that. And so I had a split reaction to that, because I actually had a part of me that was like, sort of, I guess you could say, not the spiritual side, but I don't know how to put it. But a part of me was like, oh, I'm a failure as a father because he said that. And then the other part of me was to basically turn to my brother who was with us and be like, see, I told you.
Yeah. Right? It's funny because like,
no matter what you tell them, they're gonna grow into who they grow into. And so the reality, of course, is that me telling him those things probably did have some influence on the way that his thoughts formed as he was growing up, but it didn't stop him from coming to his own rationalizations about whatever. And even that, what he said at 13, a few years later when I brought that up, he basically was like, well, you know, now I'm basically like, you know, it's closer to agnostic or whatever. He's like, I don't really know, you know, I don't. So, and that happens with a lot of people too, all these different phases of things, you know, and that they go through with their own faith, their own beliefs and whatever. So, but it reminded me of that because I was thinking there's always debates or arguments or discussions about, you know, nature versus nurture and how much parents, you know, how much they can mold and shape their children into something. But
like you had that freedom, like you want to give that freedom to your children. I think that's just like a healthy aspect of whatever personality we come from. Like if we understand that our children aren't extensions of us, that they're their own being, that's really a healthy place to come from parenting. Like one of my children now says that, you know, he goes back and forth one year to the next. Like he believes, he doesn't believe, he believes, he doesn't believe. But they'll still want the mantras. They'll still want like that kind of essence, or me to burn the incense, you know, even though they don't believe. There's certain things that they still feel comfortable with that have been there for them, despite whether or not they're in a place that they're saying they believe or not. But as an INFJ mom, when they come in, and, you know, that might freak out other people in the room, where one of my children, even though my whole existence really revolves around spirituality and religion to a great extent, I'm just happy that they feel the freedom to express their own self and to figure themselves out and to have that platform. To me, I'm not so worried about which way or not they go, because I feel that ultimately they have the intelligence and they have the supportive environment, that whatever they choose, it's going to be the best thing for them, because spirituality might be the best thing for me, but it might not be for them. Yes.
So, I was going to say about, because you picked on something in your analysis of Jeff, in your intuitive way, you picked on something about Jeff's childhood. And I wonder, Jeff, how important was your childhood? Because you told me about just how controlling your father was. And how much of an impact do you think that had on you? Like your love of freedom?
Tons. I mean, I think I told you, I've told other people that when I was in like my mid-20s and had not lived with my father full time for more than a decade and not really seen him for several years even, I still occasionally had dreams where he came into my room, the room that I was living in then, and was yelling at me about something, So that's how much of a presence he was in my life. And there were things that, I would hold back from doing just because it was like, he's going to find out about this somehow and punish me for it. So, yeah, I mean, a huge influence on me. And so much so that I think when I think people have over the years, mistaken my personality type for others, sometimes it can almost be directly attributed to the actions of my father, because he did so much to sort of repress my natural expression as I was growing up, that's why I thought I was an introvert for the longest time, because I misunderstood what introversion and extroversion were, because it basically attributed my social awkwardness and to introversion, which it isn't the same thing. And I basically sort of became what's seen as a stereotype of an introvert out of necessity, because it was a survival technique. It was a way to avoid being hurt. It wasn't my preference. If I do it by preference, I'm about as, even though the tests don't quite show this because the way they ask questions, but in just looking at the preference, I'm about as strong an extrovert as you can be, because I don't ever want to be alone. I adapt to being alone because I am a lot of the time, and I adjust to that, and I do what I need to do in order to not have that make me go crazy. But I don't want to be alone. Whenever I watch TV shows or movies where somebody is like, it's emphatically telling someone I want to be alone, or somebody is like, oh, I'll leave you alone. Like they say this is a positive thing. Oh, I'll leave you alone so you can do what. Every single time I hear that, that's a negative to me. I'm like, I want to beam into that thing and tell the person, no, I don't want to be left alone.
Yeah.
Alone is a bad thing.
My son echoes that. My kids have gone through a lot of psychological abuse, physical abuse as well. And I had a lot of psychological stuff too growing up. I'm an introvert, and I played an extroverted role in most of my upbringing because that's what was good. That's what garnered love and praise and comfort and gave me some mode of, that's where I'd get positive energy as a child, is when I would excel in extroverted things that, made my parents happy, etc. But with my own sons, I would say that my oldest is probably like you, like about as much of an extrovert as one can be. But when you watch like the mental conditioning, like bring somebody down to the point now, like his behavior is very isolated and very introverted looking, but he's not. He's like stuck, and that's why we're trying to do things in such a roundabout way, in a holistic way, in a different way, because I see that this type of thing, it actually changes the psyche of a child. And that is huge impressions that in my work, what I see is people in their 50s and 60s daily that are still holding on to that child, that are still holding on to the same constrictions that they walk around with. Now, I think that this is a huge tool. This is one of the biggest tools for me in terms of trying to aid my own children, is like the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and socionics, and taking this opportunity to see like, what the healthiest example can be versus something that's unhealthy, because I'm so very different than the psychology of my son. And I realized that I never would have understood him really, even with my empathy. Like, I can pick up where something was wrong. I knew things were wrong. My intuition told me. I didn't have proof of things were wrong until later. So my intuition told me, but I couldn't get to the landscape of my son without something like this. So I think that this is such like a huge tool and just a moment for anybody that ends up watching, because a lot of people aren't as vulnerable as you are, in terms of sharing that type of information. But a lot of people do go through things and don't realize that understanding the levels of health in terms of typology can really help showcase, like where people can zig and zag to try and work towards getting into, a more positive place in their life. And with my son, he really exampled a lot of extroverted tendencies in the younger years, and over the past 4 or so years has become very much the model of an introvert. And I know that it's not his nature at all. And so it's always hopeful for me to like do these things and listen and see people like modeling their healthier version as adults, using, whatever methods and tools there are. But like a question that I have in my own mind as an INFJ, is listening to you and listening to others, there is that paradoxical nature within me that, like, yes, everything is the universe and it's expansive and we go through existential rabbit holes. But then also, if you want to look at science, is there anybody that is intuitive or empathic that hasn't gone through some type of serious something like that altered the way that we had to navigate life, to be like in that fight or flight state, to have to be really, really on guard and develop these types of tendencies, because this is still showing up in your dreams, in your psyche, is that big of an impact. And I know it's that big of an impact for my son. And then, I don't know, you think about Carl Jung, I know we're going into Myers-Briggs, but like just that collective consciousness that we all become part of. So the dreamscape, right? And just being able to connect with one another in those other psychic realities, or, I don't know. It's very interesting. Like right now in my brain, it's all turning into like a web, because it's like opening up this portal of other personality types that wouldn't necessarily hone into these things, but we're all so connected in all these various modes that it just brings it to one of those moments where I'm willing to like shatter everything that I believe in this moment to try and find that pinnacle of truth. It's like, where exactly does this come from? And science can intervene in like a huge way in that respect, even though I'm a very psychic person that is, open to phenomena all the time, that I feel validated in because it's repeated enough times that I trust the validity of it. But this moment to me is one of those moments where I'm like, it's a very interesting, because not many people are vulnerable. So
that's the contrast I was making earlier when I talked about it was me with the INFPs in the chat. Is then as soon as you start talking about collective consciousness and webs and stuff like that, I'm like, no, I want to bust out of the web. I'm not part of a collective consciousness. I'm an individual. Don't try to put me in your web.
Right.
So, yeah.
There's no web in your mind. There's no web. Is that what you're saying?
I hope not. I mean, if there is, I'm sure that's like a trap. So you have a spider web, and it's a way for them somebody to devour you.
I think about it as like little neurons pinging through like this fantastic galaxy. It's like one here, and we just ping off of each other, and it turns into this luminous field. That's how my brain works about it. But then I also get stuck in existential rabbit holes where I'm like, oh shoot, it's me and only me, and I've invented every single character here, and I'm the only one that can play all of this out, and it can go in that way too. So
yeah, so that's what I was saying is the big difference between NF and SP when it comes to that sort of thing, because on the I can be a very strong feeler and relate to all of the like sensitive, issues and stuff like that when it comes to the feeling side. But then as soon as you start going into the, the rabbit holes, as you say, I either lose interest, or I actually have like actively feel hostile towards the idea.
I get it, because I get it on the flip side sometimes. Yeah. So not so much anymore.
And my son, we've said multiple times, it's funny because when I say something again, like whatever it is, if I've said it before, my son will be like, all you do is restate the same information. He says things like that to me all the time. But but the thing is we are so much alike, and yet in the one area that we're different, which is the T versus F thing, we're like super different, because he's probably, he's about 100% T and I'm about 100% F. So it's like, we can, as he says, like we take in information and we're seeing that we observe the same things in the same way. And then as soon as we start to, when we actually like, analyze it or whatever it is, process we're going through to where we take it from there, that's where we just like split off completely and don't understand where the other one is going. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
You once said that one difference, a clear difference, well, that you've noticed, that I think for you it's like the SFPs would talk to somebody to get to know them, and in the process they might learn something, whereas the STPs talk to somebody to learn something in the process that might.
Yeah, that came directly out of my conversation with DJ R&D back, when he was still doing videos, because we did a chat on my channel, and actually he was the one who said that first, that because he just started talking about like, he looked at it as he saw like a whole bunch of people that he knew in his life as his best friends. He would be like, you're my best friend and you're my best, whereas because I attach more of an emotional thing to something like that, where a best friend would be sort of this person that you can always rely on for, support and comfort and things like that. I don't have a best friend and never really have, because the thing I feel like that the kind of emotional need that I look for in that has not existed. Whereas from his perspective, he's like, all these people are my best friends because they're all sort of somebody that I gained something, I learned something from or whatever. And when he was talking about meeting strangers or meeting people just sort of out in the wild, so to speak, he would say, I will talk to someone to get information. And in the process of getting that information, I learn more about them as a person. I get to know them. And I said that was really interesting because I do exactly the opposite. But I do the same thing, but in the opposite way. Like I meet people, I want to know about them. I want to learn about them. And in the process of doing that and learning more about them as a person, I gain information. So the information is sort of the side effect or the supplement to getting to know the person. Whereas for him as an ESTP, it was exactly the other way around. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. And yeah, he was the one that first brought that up. And I just thought that was cool.
And a quick line is STP is object focused, SFP is people focused.
Yeah, and Morgan and I joke all the time about that stuff because I'm constantly like getting mad at inanimate objects and telling them, I'll drop the paper towels on the floor and pick it up and slam it on the counter and be like, I didn't tell you to do that, And I'll say objects hate me, and because he's always saying people are stupid, and I'm always like, he gets mad. He gets much more mad at people than I do. I always give people the benefit of the doubt. And I'm always thinking, what did this person go through, or what? I'm like, what are the positives of this person when they make me mad? Whereas objects, I'm like, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You suck. You suck so much. Like I say these things to objects that can't hear me and have no feelings. Whereas it's the opposite, where the object is just a man-made thing that only has its capacity to do what it's been made to do. Whereas people, have free will and choice to be how they're being, and they're all terrible, according to him.
Jeff, could you say something? I think it's interesting. Could you say that things about Morgan and like how he views? I think he once said that nobody likes ESTPs, and that a lot of the ESTP characters on television aren't proper ESTPs. They tend to be the jock ESTP rather than the the one that you can admire.
Yeah, he basically says they're almost never written well, and they're always written to be the villain or the person who's antagonizing everybody else or is annoying or whatever. I tried to point out some ESTP hero characters like Indiana Jones or I'm like they're out there, but I mean I sort of sympathize with what he's saying, but I also think he's so self-critical, but he's also so critical of other people, and he just it comes off really negative to me, even though he gets upset at me calling him that because he says he's just realistic, but I'm realistic too.
I remember that bit, Jeff, where we were talking about needling people. Morgan thought we were talking about him, and it says, "Why does everybody say that about me?"
Yeah, well, I talked about DJRD earlier, like when he did those videos where he was contrasting types or talking about like how you tell the difference between this type and this type or relating to certain types. Anytime he talked about like how that type is in relation to his own type, to ESTPs, it was always like basically here's the ways that this type of person reacts in a hostile way to me. They were always like, this is how this is the way that they react in a hostile way. I forgot how he worded it, but that's why when I did my ESTPs Y video, I was like, maybe you should think you're the common denominator here, because it was like everything was in relation to how they reacted badly to him. I'm like, maybe you're doing something that might provoke these reactions. They're not just this type's natural reaction, or naturally how they are. It's like it was always in the context of how they would react when he did something antagonizing to them. So, yeah, it's like, and I try to remind him, because when he says things like, why do people say I'm negative or why do people say I'm hostile? It's like, then a few minutes later, and somebody's like, says anything, and he's like, yeah, they're stupid and ugly. Stupid, ugly, annoying people do that kind of thing. And like, those are the types of things you say that make people think you're hostile or,
So I think,
or whatever.
Jeff, could you say a bit about when your son says, like, I think he defended it as posing? What does it maybe say things just to see how people react?
Well, he says everybody is posing. That's kind of his thought, is that everybody is a character and a poser, and it's just a matter of how important it is to them to pose a certain way, or how important their character is. He uses those type of phrases all the time. He'll say about somebody, a bit like, that person has decided that their character is this to me, and whatever it is, So that was kind of interesting, because I think it sort of is what Kersey talked about, the chameleon tendencies of SPs is sort of coming across as whatever other people sort of interpret them to be, and the ability to just sort of come across in different ways depending on who we're talking to. And that's kind of how his version of that is, talking about people posing or being a character, which, I think my type as ESFPs is like the most likely to sort of follow that all the world's a stage mentality. I remember somebody asking me in some group, when I did like a Ask an ESFP topic or something, they were like, what do you ever get tired of being on, quote unquote, just like performing, like, and I said no, because what you have to understand is that is the relief form. That's the natural place you have to be. It is in a context where we can perform. All the time that we can't do that, when we're having to conform to society's version of how people are supposed to be in whatever way, that's when we're, being drained and feeling, because we talked about stage fright, and I said, I've never experienced stage fright, because stage is the comfortable place. Fright is everything else that's off stage. I have the rest of the world fright and stage comfort.
Jonathan, I know you're getting tired, but could you ask a question about E7 fears and what Jeff just said there about wanting to stay in that moment of performer?
Well, the stuff he was saying earlier was actually more E7 things like not wanting to be in the web and stuff because sevens don't like being trapped, they like being stuck. And some of the individual stuff is probably 7 and 4 as well, things like not generalizing. Those things together.
I was always thinking like the 7 defense strategies of maybe the NE ones might imagine themselves in a future, and where you've got Jeff there performing these characters, someone who's different from himself. What is that related to a fear of what are the fears of the 7 then? Maybe you could go through the fears of the 7.
The fears of the
Pain.
7.
Huh.
Yeah, go ahead.
I said pain.
Yeah, pain. Yeah, pain and being trapped, being imprisoned.
Yeah.
All those things. Being stuck, being bored. All those things. Basically, they're being bored is a fear because if they're bored, they don't have distractions. If they don't have distractions, they become anxious. That sort of thing. It's like boredom can make them anxious. Emotional pain can be fear as well. That's part of the reason 7s are called a positive type, but that means they're upbeat. That does not mean they're completely positive. It means that they're preferring to be positive rather than negative. They're preferring to be optimistic out of a fear of being pessimistic. That sort of thing.
Yeah, actually, no, I can see this group chat now. Ruth's question about fear of pain, emotional pain. I mean, the first thing pops in my head is actually physical pain, but I'm sure it's emotional pain too. I mean, basically any kind of pain. That I think the no pain, no gain cliche is probably less. That would be less of a 7 thing probably, and less of an SFP thing too. But
well, it could be 7s if they've got like 3 or 8 in the tri-type. It can be a 7 if they have like 3 or 8 in the tri-type, because your tri-type will kind of determine what kind of pain you don't like and what kind of things you regard as pain in the first place.
Yeah, my tri-type would be 7, 4, 9. So I'm like, I want everybody to be having a good time in the most individual way possible.
Oh,
that's my
Jeff,
way of putting that.
Jeff, I think the way that you talk about attention is interesting. That a lot of people see it as negative if somebody wants a lot of attention, whereas you don't. You've reframed it as something that a lot of people don't think about. Like I say, oh, that person's an attention whore. Whereas,
oh yeah, I mean, attention's not a bad thing. I don't understand people acting like it is. Like that in itself is not inherently a bad thing. It's if somebody is doing things, is doing things to hurt people in a way to get attention, then the problem is that they're hurting people, not that they want attention.
there's an interesting bit in this book, the Enneagram, what is it, applications. It says here, and this is, I think, more true to the NE ones. Under stress, they adopt what is called an as-if frame, where the 7 makes up positive fantasies about the future and pretends they are reality. I mean, I do that, but I think they're actually more. If I think I'm moving towards it, if I think I'm eventually moving towards it, then I don't see it as a fantasy. I see it as a goal that I'm moving towards. Because Spencer Fearon had this expression. I've written it on here, where he put, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So I feel if I have the goal and I have the plan and I'm moving towards it, even if I'm moving towards it slowly, then I think it's real, because I think it's a place that I'm then get to. And then if I'm not moving towards it, then I get depressed because I think, oh, that's just a wish. Because I wonder how that was for you, Jeff. Or
well, I mean, I can sort of relate to that, and when I'm, thinking about like my recent weight loss and stuff, because, I did set like a weight goal in terms of a number I was trying to reach on the scale, but I knew ahead of time, if I reach that and I just say, oh, well, I accomplished that, and then that's over, then I wouldn't I wouldn't really sustain it. It would just, if I just went back to old habits and then I would gain the weight back again. So it wasn't as much about reaching a certain point. That was just sort of a milestone, or something to sort of aim at, to give myself sort of a focus, but it wasn't the be all end all of it. And people ask me now, because one of the questions, when you tell people, okay, I lost, this much weight, then their questions are usually one of two things: either, okay, how'd you do it? And then once you answer that, then they say, well, what are you trying to do now? Or what's your goal weight? Or what are you trying to, and so it's a little less clear now, because I don't have an exact number that I'm trying to do, but I have other things I'm trying to do. But I don't know. I sort of relate to what you said, the wish thing, because honestly, when I set getting under 200 pounds as a thing, I wasn't sure that I could do that, but I was optimistic about it. I thought, I think I can do that, but it's still like a far off thing. That's what I felt about it. So it was sort of a wish, but it was a somewhat realistic wish. I don't know if you want to call it that. It wasn't like, the kind of far off dream, like living at Disney World or something like that. It was like, this is achievable if I find the right way to do it, if I stay with the thing that's pointing me in the right direction. So, but on a day-to-day basis, it was easy to get discouraged at times. But the easiest way to encourage myself was to do things like, I've got this weight tracker app on my iPad, and I could just go and see how far I'd come. So, that part was, I have no idea. You just asked the others, and I'm looking at I have no idea if any of the other people, if I've bored them all to tears, or whether they actually have been interested in listening to what I was talking about. Or that's the thing, is when I talk about the performing aspect or whatever, if I don't have feedback on those things, I don't know. So my default is to think everybody's like, well, this dude, shut up, So that's probably, I'm self-critical that way, is that I think of it. But thank you, Justine and Ruth, for reassuring you. That's the thing, is it doesn't take much. Somebody tells me, assuming that you're being honest, then I'm like, cool, okay.
I'm the same. I need a lot of feedback just to feel.
So if I don't get that, then I tend to go the other direction. I actually recorded a video about this the other day that will eventually make it up to my channel, where I was talking about, I used Chris Farley as an example, just because he's sort of a tragic example of somebody that I think was an ESFP, and sort of an extreme version of the emotional need of someone to validate his existence on such a regular basis, that when he didn't get that, he would go out of control, because he wasn't getting the validation of, he's a funny, entertaining person that people like. It's like, it sounds like a simple thing, but just telling somebody that, that for people like me, that's where our self-esteem comes from. So other people are like, well, I don't want to give this person a big head, or, I don't want them to become, self-absorbed or narcissistic or any of these things. But to me, it's like, what you do when you say, I'm not going to do that, is I'm not going to meet the basic needs of this person. That's basically what it is, because everybody has those things. For us, that just happens to be what it is those are things we need to hear to validate our existence. And so that, for earlier, when I was, doing my darndest to be a type 5 or whatever, somebody like that, is more about what they've learned, in contrast to what I was saying, whereas I don't really care to learn a certain amount of stuff.
You did read a lot of Kersey books, though, Jeff.
Right, but I didn't learn it so that I had this storehouse of knowledge for any particular reason, or just for anyone to see me as an expert or anything like that. I did it, well, number one, just because it was the fun thing to do at the time, but also because it was I started to understand, the stuff that I rejected when I was younger and said, oh, some egghead who wrote a book can't understand me. I started like seeing those things illustrated in real life, and saying, maybe there's something to this, especially reading the descriptions of the motivations for things and being like, I kind of see where this is coming from now. I think this does sort of make sense for some of the things I've done in my life. So it's weird actually to read something that describes you in a way that feels like somebody sort of has a window into the inside of you. So
I think Janae said last time that she would talk to people and keep quiet about typology, and they think that she's a wizard for sort of knowing about them.
Well, I've told you before, I've talked about how when I learned about guardians, about SJs and the whole caring about honor and duty and all those things, that just how much like in my job, most of our managers are guardians. And when I would be talking to them about a mistake they made or something and trying to reassure them because they would kind of be flustered about, they were embarrassed they made this mistake. And I would say, your honor is still intact. And virtually everyone I said that to, like they said something in response where they really did make them feel better. Like it made an impact on them, in a way that, I wouldn't have never thought to do that in the past before I read that stuff, because it wouldn't have occurred to me because I didn't care about my honor. So it was an insight that gave me a new tool, to use in life.
Janae, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Have you know a lot about Enneagram. Have you got any questions for Jeff about 7?
Not off the top of my head, I don't.
That's funny that he's like, you know a lot about Enneagram. Do you have any questions for this dork who doesn't really know much about it?
No, I can see his tri-type though as he's talking. It makes sense to me. Because I know someone that's a ESFP 7, but they're a little bit different because I think they have a 3 and an 8 as well. So there's a pretty different energy level, I think. With you said you're 4, 7, 9, but 7 first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a big difference because of that. So it's been interesting to see that. I like hearing people's life stories and learning about them. So.
That I do too, and I also like telling mine. So that's great. That's
yeah,
what
I do too.
I don't know, if somebody doesn't tell me those things, whether they're enjoying it or not, because, I was thinking when sorry, I lost her name again. Sensual Mist was here earlier. That for a while there, it was mostly the two of us, going back and forth, and I was like, I was thinking to myself, you realize I can do this as long as you want to, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if it's talking about ourselves, I mean, I can go into the night. I don't ever run out of things to say. So when I stop, it's because I have to stop myself for other reasons, like the fact that I'm starving, or need to go to the bathroom.
When I'm here.
Yeah.
That's why I have my camera off part of the time, but I can relate to that. I think some of that's the 4 in there too, and I think it's being a feeler, because I like understanding people and relationships. I love identity. I like to hear who people are and why they're that way, and I like to talk about that too. So I can relate to that, but I see that in you. You seem like you do care about your identity and understanding yourself better. And that's the difference between the person I know who's a 7, 3, 8. They're not as into that kind of stuff quite as much. So it was interesting to see the difference.
Yeah, and that's something that I've come into more as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
But I would say to people now, just because I'm self-absorbed and can talk about myself for hours doesn't mean that I don't also care about learning about other people. It's like that's the process where I also do that. It's give and take, and even if I say more than the other person, I still do get something out of the other side of it too. And it's it's fascinating. I like hearing other people's perspectives and where they come from. That's much more important to me than categorization. And that's the thing that sounds funny sometimes to people who say, oh, well, you're into type stuff, so it's important to you to categorize people. But it really isn't as much about that. It's just sort of like what you were saying, you can see certain elements of my personality. My thought is like, these are just sort of these different things that come together to form the whole of a person. But the key is still the person as an individual. It's not, I don't look at, if I get to know somebody who's a type 9 or whatever, I could say, okay, maybe I've learned a little bit more about type 9s by talking to this person. But to me, I look at it as I've learned more about this person. The type 9 thing is sort of secondary. It's like the supplement to it. It's not the main thing.
Yeah, I use it as like, it's a guideline. It's not the whole person. And I find the parts that contradict your personality type or your Enneagram type, that's what's really interesting to me, because everybody doesn't fit perfectly into these categories.
Yeah.
And I like seeing the parts and pieces that don't make sense.
When I've had people that I was sort of trying to help come to their type in various ways, and they'd say something like, I relate to a lot of things I read in profiles of like 12 of the types, and I'm like, congratulations, you're a well-rounded person,
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't mean that, because some people like try to act like that means somebody is super confused because they have all these elements. And I'm like, no, that's just somebody who's got a lot of variety to them. They're not just a stereotype. And I look at it like, I remember I was having a discussion in, I think, a Facebook group or something with the guy who was an ENTP. I don't know what Enneagram type, but we were talking about debating. We were debating in a sense. And I said, I was getting upset at him for sort of continually like referring to me as sort of a group instead of myself. It was sort of like, you're one of this group and this is what this group is like. And I'm like, but I'm not like that. So stop talking to me as if I'm this. And he was like, well, that's what debate is like, having the sides and then having the ammunition to like defend that side or attack the other side. And I said, but I don't see things like that. And I said, maybe that's why I don't like debate, because what I do is anytime I'm discussing anything, whether it's a disagreement or not, I could be like vehemently disagreeing with somebody about an issue or whatever it is. And the whole time that they're expressing themselves, my number one thing I get out of it is I want to learn about why they believe what they believe, how they came to it, where they're from, what the background is, those things that go into that. I'm really less concerned with trying to prove that person wrong. When it comes to their own stuff. About myself, I'm usually most concerned with just representing myself as good as I possibly can in whatever it is I'm expressing. And so that's why I get so upset when somebody like attaches false motives or things that I don't believe in to me, because they're like, oh, he believes X. X is reminiscent of Group A, therefore he's in Group A, therefore he believes the following 100 things that Group A believes. And I'm going to argue with those things instead of the thing he actually said or find out what he actually believes about anything. Whereas I actually go so extreme in the other direction that I'll lose track of what the so-called debate point was as I ask questions or say things to try to get to know that person better, because I care more about that.
So you think that you get the impression sometimes maybe that other people care more about the system in their mind than the actual person they're talking to?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're asking questions of someone just to learn a group that you can place them in order to argue against that group, or even argue with the group, if you try and I can't relate to that mentality at all. To me, that's like the most counterproductive thing you can do, because you're just perpetuating misunderstanding and confusion.
I mean, ENTPs and ESTPs, they have this problem with it's imaginatively putting themselves inside another person, inside their shoes, seeing from their point of view. In that process, there's a lot of reading in and sort of educated guesswork and with the empathy. But ENT, it's like when you say get to know the person, that's hard for ENTPs and ESTPs to like see that, to see the person.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the disconnects that happens with my son, is that, even is he has that tendency to see people as sort of tools to be used in some capacity. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't care about them or have compassion for people. A lot of people probably wouldn't think he did, just from observing him or listening to some of the things he says. But because I'm with him all the time and have been his whole life, I know those sides of him.
All right. So, Ruth, have you got any more questions? Ruth or Justina or even Sana, have you got any questions for Jeff?
I feel funny every time he says that, like, this was like an interview of me or something.
Yeah, well, you'd always want to take advantage.
But nobody else was jumping in and talking about anything, so it's like,
I mean, Sana, you always keep saying that in socionics that extroverted sensing is about power. So what about for Jeff, though? Maybe we can sort of test that, because you can see it with his son.
What about him? I mean, what's the question?
Well, for Jeff, it seems to be more about freedom. So,
Yeah.
So is there a question you could ask Jeff about power to sort of validate?
No, I don't.
So.
No, not really. I mean, I don't really know him. I have never personally typed him as such, so there isn't really any. I don't wonder about his type.
Yeah, go on.
It doesn't seem like you like me very much. Am I projecting onto you, or are you just
I just don't really know you like at all.
Oh,
Really.
I mean, but do you want to, or do you not care?
I'm pretty neutral on the topic.
Okay.
I'm just quietly listening.
Well, my agenda is that I think that the socionics definition of extroverted sensing is too narrow, that it focuses too much on the power aspect. And it's, I mean, some of it, like, incidentally talk about freedom, but it seems like it gets at, say, ESTP, SE, but for someone like Jeff, it doesn't really get to it, in my opinion. I just see it as too narrow.
Do you mean if he displays power sensing to me?
Yeah, or maybe you could ask him some questions to sort of.
I mean,
Okay.
I don't necessarily get the like a strong sense of socionics SE for him, but that doesn't mean much, because just because you're an SE ego doesn't necessarily mean that you're in your face all the time. I would need to actually interact with him and see how he reacts in very different situations to be able to tell.
Now, what Victor thinks is that he thinks that for ESFP, for SEE, he defines it as SE plus, and he does put it about freedom in terms of power sensing of resistance. It's like it's resisting people trying to control you. Would you think that's a big thing, Jeff? Like pushing back against people who are trying to control you?
Well, I mean, it's I don't know about the pushing back part. I try to. That's something to do when it's necessary, but in general, it's just trying to avoid it. But Justine asked about how the 9 mixes in, I guess, in my tri-type or whatever. I don't know. I'm really, my Enneagram knowledge is pretty small. But what I understand of 9, I think they're described as like peacemakers, or people that basically kind of want things to I don't know, be peaceful in some capacity or whatever. And I guess, so I think about myself, or they get described as laid back. And so I guess that would be sort of the side of me that's like that, that I don't try to create conflicts, at least not most of the time. I'm trying to read what this huge diagram with a bunch of words that Ben told me to look at, the peacemaking, mediator, deflection, stubbornness, all that applies. The say nothing much doesn't, but
Janae, could you describe the 9?
Laziness, sure. Lacking, it depends.
What were you asking?
Janae, if you could like put the 9 in a nutshell, then we could sort of see how much that is a part of, or how much part of Jeff resembles that pattern with the 9.
It's mostly about not wanting conflict and wanting to kind of maintain your outer world and your inner world and have them be harmonious. So it takes a lot of energy to do that. Like my daughter's a 9, and she is very good at seeing other people's point of view. Like kind of what you were saying about you're kind of wanting to get to know each person as an individual, and you seem like you're open to other people's viewpoints. You're not as much wanting to debate the viewpoints as understand everyone's viewpoint. Is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah, and I mean, in a situation like what we're doing right now, even the concerns that I expressed about, like, am I boring people or things like that, as it really is not as much about my own ego as it is like, I want for people, I'd prefer the people be having a good time, enjoying themselves, feeling good, and not there being like tension or
contribute to the group. Yeah, it's like, I can see that because there's like a laid back feeling to it. There's a, I don't want to cause conflict. I want to be open and accepting. Kind of, I don't know, an expansive type view about things.
Yeah, I've described to people often. I've said what the difference between like egotistical and arrogant is, because I am an egotistical person, but I'm not an arrogant person, and they're really not the same thing. Because in order to really be arrogant, then you got to have this feeling of superiority over someone, and I don't have that at all. I look at it as we're all just fellow travelers on the road of life. My perspective is just my perspective. I don't put myself on a pedestal based on anything. If anything, I'm more self-critical, self-deprecating, than anybody could possibly. I've hurt myself worse than anyone else could possibly hurt me. So there's never a pretext of I'm coming from a superior place. And even with children, I relate to children sometimes more than adults. And my son, has this idea of me because of the way, because growing up, I was his main authority figure, besides obviously teachers or people at school and things like that. He was like, well, you would tell me what to do. You wanted to be like this. You wanted to pretend you were a guardian or whatever. You're the poser of trying to be the authority guy. And then like I felt like that was my responsibility to be that to him. But it doesn't mean that I wanted to control him, because I didn't. I wanted to provide him with opportunities in life to do whatever it is he wanted to do with his life. I wanted to make sure he could get to adulthood and still be alive and have things to do with his life. So I did that the best I knew how to do. But I was not somebody who was like, I want to mold him into some copy of me or some kind of image of what I think he should be. I never looked at it that way.
Yeah, you don't come across that way. What your wing is with your 7? If it's 6 or 8?
6. I mean, as best I understand it, yeah. And Jonathan, who knows way more about the stuff than I did, said he'd actually use me as an example to other people as a 7 wing 6. So I figure if he says it, then it's probably true.
Well, you were talking about being self-deprecating and kind of, because I'm 6 with the 7 wing, so I can kind of relate well to a lot of things you say, because I do the 7 too. It's just, not my main style, but I kind of see that in what you were saying about there's kind of a sense when you have a 6 or 6 wing that you don't feel superior to other people, and you kind of want to be able to relate to most people, and you kind of tend to do it with self-deprecation. So I could relate to a lot of what you were saying with that too.
Yeah, and to go back a little bit to Justine's question about like the 9 mixing in, when I think about sort of with 9 and 4 together, I kind of think of it as I have super strong opinions, but they're no more important than anyone else's. And that's how I feel like I sort of give an example of both of those things at the same time, because it's like there's definitely lines in the sand with me. There's things I'm like, this is a principle I believe in, and there's no getting me off of it. But some other person I encounter has a different life, a different perspective, came from a totally different place, came to a different conclusion. Who am I to say that I know better than them, or my opinion, my perspective is somehow superior to theirs? It's not. They're just another human, just like I am. So, it doesn't mean that I question my own belief and say, well, maybe I'm wrong because this person said this. I mean, there is a part of me that does. I do question in the sense that I do ask myself, where does this come from? But it's less important to me because there are things that I just believe this is right and wrong, regardless of how I came to that. That's just what I believe. And it's not going to change because someone tells me the opposite. But it does not mean that I think, oh, because I have this belief and they have the opposite belief, that means I'm one of the good ones and they're one of the bad ones. I don't see it that way.
Well, they have an interesting thing if you read about 9s enough, that it's kind of a misconception that 9s don't have strong opinions, because a lot of times they do know how they feel inside, and they'll describe 9s as an immovable object in some ways inside. I guess I
was just thinking about sort of the view of them trying to like get harmony or to mediate things or whatever, so trying to see both sides of things or solve conflicts or whatever you want to call it, because I will try to do that sometimes where there's opposing points of view in some way, and I'll try to sort of find the common ground. And so that's probably another way where, in the Myers-Briggs stuff, then I start more relating to the NFs again, because they kind of have that desire for, seeing the multiple perspectives or trying to, create harmony from conflict. And so I sort of relate to that in the sense that, and the big picture thing. I don't generally sort of look at things that way, but I guess that's the main time I do, is when I'm trying to sort of bring people together in a sense, is that I sort of like, oh, wait a minute, okay, you're both human beings, regardless of where you came from, this thing that is dividing you, that's just enough that you're both digging in your heels so much. I'm not saying that whatever it is not important, but I'm saying that maybe it's not a reason to like hate each other or, tear each other's heads off or whatever, because maybe there's something more than that that's more important. And Ruth asked about 7 avoiding pain in the mental sense, stuck in thought rather than stuck in feeling. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I look at it as well, I don't know, stuck. Let me think about that for a second. I very rarely feel like I'm stuck in thought. That doesn't happen with me, but that just might be I'm stupid. I really don't know. Stuck in feelings, that definitely happens. That's why this whole thing of categorizing in the Enneagram, of saying that my type is a so-called head type, because any time there's something where it's like head versus heart, I always think, well, I'm definitely the heart side of whatever. And Jonathan tried to explain to me, I think maybe more than once, what it meant as far as like what a head type really meant versus that. But it still didn't really make sense to me, because I'm so strongly in that mindset of I'm very much a heart rules the mind type of person. So it's hard for me to understand that idea that I would be categorized in anything as a head type versus a heart type. So
I think that on this profile of I think this profile, this Naranjo profile of the 7 is very ENTP-ish.
It's very bunch of words. Is that what you're?
Yeah, there's a lot of words as well, but it's bits like there's little bits every now and then about we got here blind to others' feelings. There, that seems like an ENTP 7 because that wouldn't be appropriate for say ESFP or ENFP.
Yeah, I don't think so. I would think if an ESFP is blind to others' feelings, then it's one that is in a particular state or phase where they're just so focused on their own needs being met or not being met that they're got the blinders on in that context. But I would say that's not the general normal way of being for an ESFP for sure.
It's going to be difficult to write a 7 profile where everything is true.
There are people that it's harder to figure out their feelings.
Mm.
I think we demonstrated that earlier right here in this chat. I wasn't aware, or I had to sort of ask what people were feeling about, what I was talking about, or just the fact that I was talking, because I didn't know for sure just from observing, people, even the people that were on camera, especially the people not on camera. It's hard to tell. So it's not that I just have this instant. I'm not in the collective consciousness web she was talking about earlier, where I just instantly know. What she was talking about getting. I don't think she said vibes, but I forgot what the term she used was about getting these essences or different things from the people. I don't get that. That's the end thing that I don't have.
I've done about 200 hangouts with Jeff where he wasn't on webcam, and it was a little frustrating at times where but I sort of got used to just focusing on the voice and and
that was my own personal insecurity. It wasn't anything against Ben, and just comfort level, when we're doing things like TV reviews and stuff, and I just want to be able to sort of lie back on the couch and get into whatever position is comfortable and not worry about trying to look a certain way on camera.
It wasn't.
That's probably another thing that like certain other types would care less about how they appeared on camera. Whereas for me, I can't ignore that. If I see myself at all, like I am going through like all of the flaws in myself. Like right now, just looking at myself on camera here, I'm thinking my hair looks stupid. So that's just it's one of those things. Like I can't.
At least you got hair.
A little bit, yeah. But yeah, I'm. So that's just.
I'll just say when I said it was only frustrating, like say less than 1% of the time, just certain times in terms of timing, and maybe sometimes where your microphone would go quiet, and it was like, oh, has he lost connection, or is he just listening? Because it sounds completely dead with the microphone at times.
Yeah. Well, we had some real interesting ones. The times where the internet was going out, and so you weren't hearing me, or I wasn't hearing you, or one of us was like long delay and then repeating a bunch of stuff, or a bunch of stuff all at once. Those kind of great technical issues. So.
Yeah. So I always tell people that I've learned a lot from Jeff, especially about sensing types, and that he's the best talker on YouTube about Kersey. And really, there should be more people talking about it.
Hey, that again, doesn't really maybe relate to what else we're talking about, but you did make me think of it that Mr. David, is it M? His middle name is David M. Kersey.
Yes, David Mark Kersey. Yes.
Yeah, the son of the author. When somebody mentioned me in one of the Kersey groups about. They were asking about like if any of his books were available on Audible or something like that, and Goodrum said like I should read it or something. And I just happened to mention, oh, well, I did record myself reading Please Understand Me Too. And now David wants me to send it to him. So
Ooh, excellent.
Something may come of that. It was so long ago. I don't think it was a great performance. I don't think I pronounced a lot of things right. I don't even remember if I pronounced Kersey right, because at the time I may have still not have heard how to pronounce his name correctly. So I don't know if it's actually going to turn into anything. But it just reminded me of it, so I figured I'd tell you that, just because I was like, well, that's kind of cool if that turns into something.
Yeah, about that with yeah. So the head type with I think with 7 comes out through the rationalization, especially if they try and rationalize away their feelings and reframe it, almost doing CBT on themselves to get rid of the feelings. But yeah, CBT. Okay, CBT is if you boil it down, it's just the idea of somebody might be. The idea is that people feel a certain way because of the way they're thinking about something. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but it is true that you can feel a certain way, feel really bad about something, but then you can reframe it, almost looking on the bright side. And so sometimes you can feel better just by changing how you think about it. So there's a thing here, some examples of some mistakes that people can make. So, for example, catastrophizing, where they'll take one thing, it's almost like they'll turn a molehill into a mountain, or the way maybe you've had that expression, Jeff, where you've experienced a similar emotion recently, and you've thought about it differently than when you've experienced that emotion in the past, and that you're able to reframe it and think about it differently, understand it from different angles. Or is that not your process? Do you just want to feel what you feel, not change how you feel?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it. I wouldn't say it's impossible that I've done that. I might have. I don't remember a specific example. It's not one of those things that concept is not something I think about, but that doesn't mean that I haven't done that at some point. Just not thought of it that way.
So they would say for CBT is that there's a difference between the event, the thing that happens to you, and how you respond to it, and the thing that determines how you. So, for example, you could have the same thing happen to 10 people, and they react in different ways. So why do they react in different ways? So it's like how they process the information, how they think about it. And so the idea is that they're feeling the emotion because of their attitudes, rules, demands, beliefs, images, meanings. And so CBT thinks that if you can change those things, change your attitudes and beliefs, that you can change your feelings about it. I think it can work sometimes. So, for example, somebody might feel certain emotions of not being worthy because they have certain beliefs about themselves. So say somebody's got low self-esteem and they feel they've got low self-esteem, but they feel that way because of the way they're thinking about themselves. So maybe if they thought differently about themselves and concentrated on what they're good at, rather than just focusing on that small bit. So you can see there, with certain things, that the way you think about it can affect how you feel.
Well, one thing I would say, and again, I don't know how much of this, is a type 7 thing, how much is an ESFP or whatever, I just know that for me, my feelings are like right under the surface all the time.
Yeah.
And just as it's really easy to hurt me, it's also really easy to make me feel good. But it's not like a buildup over time. Like, oh, well, if people are pumping me up for, a week, then I'm at this point where my self-esteem is it's reached a higher level. I mean, that moment in time, it may be, but it's just as easy for somebody to knock me down off of that than it was the week before that. Like, it's all about how I'm feeling in that moment. It's not, it's not really, when I talked earlier about milestones, that's a milestone in a sense of getting to a certain point. And so I can notice things. I can notice myself handling certain things better in terms of my conversations with other people. Like I talked about the last time I was with my mother, and she kind of panicked a little bit in the car because we were trying to go to the airport, and she didn't know exactly where we were because I made the mistake of asking her how to get to the airport, which it's a bad idea. I should have just told her I knew how to get there, but she would have eventually done the same thing. It just would have taken her longer to start panicking. But my reaction to her acting like that, I restrained myself more than I would have sometimes in the past. And so I think in that sense, I've improved. And I said to somebody, and I don't know, I don't have any scientific way to prove this, but I feel like the fact that I am better, that I'm healthier physically, I think has probably improved my ability. My blood pressure doesn't go as high, other elements don't happen when I'm in that situation. I don't have as much of that immediate sort of reaction that exacerbates the problem. But I didn't think of that at the time. It wasn't until later when I was thinking back about it, when I was sort of relating what happened, I was thinking, I bet that probably had something to do with it. And so rather than thinking of it as something where, my mental health has just gotten more mature or something like that, rather than looking at it that way, or my self-esteem has gotten higher or whatever, I just look at it as it's possible that the improvements in my physical health have allowed me to sort of mentally handle that situation better. But again, it's just sort of a theory. I don't really have any way to prove that's the case.
Janae, there's some questions in the side. I don't think you can see them about 6. Ruth, do you want to ask your question out loud, or? Well, first of all, we need to tell if Janae is there. Are you there, Janae?
Well, I'm going to take this opportunity, since we got a little bit of a pause in this, that I'm going to go ahead and head out because I really do have some other things.
Right. Okay.
To eat.
Right.
But thank you everybody for indulging me and listening to my ramblings about what we're saying.
And indulging me with the.
Yes, with Ben's idea of me coming in as a character, because.
Well, at least the main thing though was to punk Jonathan.
Well, it would have had more impact if it was more people that had been in hangouts with me before, so it was more of a.
Yeah.
But of course, that also would have made it easier to pick me out. So.
Because I was
with my acting.
Because I was thinking that the difference in your physical appearance is the thing that would convince Jonathan. Yeah. It's it's not even, because he might think, it sounds a little bit like Jeff, but that can't be Jeff. So,
yeah, you were wrong. He picked it up. He's that intuitive.
Well, but when he went away, he actually admitted that he didn't know it was you. And I'm gonna put that bit and put it up as a video. That's it. That section. And he said that he felt annoyed for being not realizing.
Enjoy the rest of your time, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. So yeah, we can. So Janae, because you're back, with Ruth, do you want to ask that question? I think you got a question about 6.
Hi, sure. So it wasn't my question, but we were speculating in the comment section if there's certain things that each Enneatype avoids and others, like if 7 avoids people with strong negative feelings, or if 6 avoids people who are indecisive who won't commit to a strong answer.
I'm thinking about that. Are you saying 6s find it uncomfortable to be around people who are indecisive? Is that what you mean? I'm not sure exactly what you're
somebody asking. Who maybe like a flip-flop decision maker. somebody who maybe was a leader, but they keep changing their mind or they're giving unclear directions?
I'll tell you what, I'll try and share the screen so you can see the chat.
Yeah, I'm on my phone, so I can't see any of that stuff.
Right. So if I do this, oh no, it's got a bit weird. But
That was funny.
can you see any of that down the side?
No, it's too little.
Okay.
On my phone, it's really small.
Well, I'll so maybe I'll.
Well, I'll just repeat the question.
go on.
Is
Okay.
I mean, just speculating. Is there certain types of people that sixes would avoid, or like certain behaviors that would make them not trust someone?
I guess I'd almost have to answer that from my own personal viewpoint, because the biggest thing about sixes really is that sixes are kind of contradictory people. And like, depending on whether you're phobic or counterphobic, that plays into it. There's a lot of variety. It depends on the day, really. I mean, what I might find difficult to deal with on one day is going to be different than another day. It's going to depend on what's going on and what I'm dealing with at the time. How I would describe myself changes from day to day depending on the situation. So I think some of that's a little bit too personal to the individual. Like with Enneagram, sometimes if you have trouble with certain numbers, it's not necessarily because of your number. It's because maybe you had wounding from people of those numbers. So I have a bunch of friends who are sixes. 3 of us in my family are sixes. And we're all pretty different. And you kind of see the same thing with 9s. There's a lot of variety between different 6s and different 9s because there are so many of them. I can answer it kind of for myself, but that doesn't mean that's the same answer any 6 would give. I like consistency, I think, when it's an authority figure, especially because I think 6s have a hard time when authority figures are inconsistent because then they feel like they can't trust them. And 6s have a hard time with trust. So if I had to say, I would say, yeah, probably 6s find it difficult if somebody's wishy-washy because they're also always trying to read people and kind of see what's hidden that people aren't saying. So if you're going back and forth, it would kind of make it hard for them to know where they stood with you. So
yeah, that's what we were
if I
talking
had
about.
to give an answer, I would say probably most 6s don't like indecisiveness, but 6s themselves are very indecisive people sometimes.
Yeah. All right. So another question was, do 6s get frustrated with people who don't show their cards, or they don't show a lot of emotion, or they kind of like play poker face?
Yeah, I would say for similar reasons, 6s are trying to read you so that they can feel safe and secure. So if they can't read you or they're getting mixed signals from you, that's going to make them uncomfortable. Well, actually, we've been talking on some Facebook groups, and it's really interesting because some 6s are very open and revealing about themselves, and some 6s are very private and they won't reveal anything. So I think some of that may come into play there about how they feel around that specific person. Like I tend to like 8s because with 8s you know where you stand. Some 6s are scared of 8s because they're come across so strong. So there's just so much variety. I think that for that particular number for a 6, it's hard to give a blanket answer for a lot of those questions. I think it's going to depend on the 6 and their tri-type and how they feel that day. I think I missed the very last part of that question. What was the last one?
I don't know.
Ah, here we go. Maybe I'm not a 6, but I've seen some get frustrated with me because I don't show much emotion.
Oh, yeah,
They don't know how I'm feeling about them.
Yeah, like somebody who's maybe they're like withdrawn type.
I think that's going to depend on your cognitive functions too. You know what I mean? Like if you're a 6 and you're an ISTJ, I don't know if you're going to get as frustrated with someone not showing emotion because they're not as likely to show their emotion either. But if you're like an INFP, maybe that's a 6, you might find it harder to relate to somebody that doesn't show emotion. So I think your cognitive functions come into play there too, not just the Enneagram, because I think that's going to be different depending on your cognitive functions. Because I have 2 family members that are ISTJs that I know they either are a 6 or they're a 6 second, and they kind of get frustrated if you do show too much emotion. So
Yeah,
and they're 6s.
Too. I said for the 5, I would say that the thing that they would avoid would be people putting demands on them, especially like an emotional demand, even though it's probably like just perceived and that might not even really exist. But
And I think if you're a 6 with a 5 wing, I'm sorry, it keeps cutting out. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
we're just saying that each type probably has certain things that they avoid, not just 7.
Right. And I think depending on whether you were 6 with a 5 or 6 with a 7, I think you'd feel a little different about emotions too. Because 2 of us in our family are 6 with 7, and we do really well with emotions. But then my son is, even though he's an INFP, he's a 6 with a 5 wing, and he actually says that sometimes he's uncomfortable when people show a lot of emotion because he doesn't know what to do with it, and it makes him feel a little bit overwhelmed. And I think it's the 5 wing there coming into play. So there's just so much variety with that.
Yeah, I think it goes beyond Enneagram too.
I'm sorry?
I think it goes beyond Enneagram and beyond cognitive functions as well.
Yeah, that's true. There's so much that factors into it. And like one thing Catherine Favre says a lot about 6s and 9s is there are 9 types of 6s and there are 9 types of 9s. So, I mean, those 2, I think, are 2 of the harder Enneagram numbers to really give blanket statements about because there's so much variety there that you can't necessarily say all of them are going to be a certain way.
Interesting. I was just wondering how when you said 9 types of 9, I was wondering how many tri-type combinations are there beginning with 9.
I'm not sure. I mean, what she was saying was, you know, there's a 1-ish 9, there's a 2-ish 9, there's a 3-ish 9. So that's kind of what she was saying is there's many types of 6s and 9s as there are of all the numbers because there's just that much variety.
Yeah, there might be 9. Yeah. I'll go through.
I don't know how many of the subtypes. I'm too tired to even think about calculating that, and I don't know it already off the top of my head.
Because for the second 6, there would be 3. So, for instance, 9-2, 9-3, 9-4.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then there would be 3 more for each one for the third 6. So yeah, there probably is 9 of each. I'm not absolutely sure on that, but I get that impression. I think that's right. Yeah. Yeah, because as soon as you pick the second one, you're then left with 3. And there's 3, so it'd be times 3, then times 3. Right. Right, I think that's maybe time to wind up. Sandra, have you got any questions for Janae?
You keep
That
trying.
puts her on the spot.
Well, you have permission to just butt in whenever you like. Because I know you've said in the past, oh, I couldn't get a word in edgeways.
It's hard to do that, though.
I'm not exactly as very alert.
Okay.
It's
Did
very
you-
late for you, I know.
Oh, I forgot about that, yes. So, yes, I will wind up now, folks. We've gone nearly 3 hours. So, more quality for you. And evidence of why I'm influenced by Jeff so much. All right. Again, I have done over 200 hangouts with them. Just 200 just on reviews. 135 on Homicide and 65 on Blake 7. And probably in total over 250. So,
Wow.
right, I'll stop it now. And I'll just say that the StreamYard looks quite good. The folks won't have seen it. Only about 4 people saw it because I've made it private afterwards. There we go.